Good morning, everyone. Just to give you an idea of what's happening, the recording for the session is working fine, but the streaming is a little delayed right now that he's working on. So since the meeting is recorded, we're going to go ahead and get started. So if we could start with roll call, please, Madam City Clerk.
Mayor Bob Keller.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Councilmember Don Gerand.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Hornish.
Present.
Councilmember Kathy Huckabee.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Odell.
Here.
Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Present.
Great. We're all here early this morning, freshly back from a Thanksgiving weekend, so I hope you all enjoyed yourself. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance, and I hope this is convenient, but Madam City Clerk, would you like to lead us in the pledge, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, you did that very well. Thank you. Okay, so the first thing is the approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say no. The agenda is approved. First thing up on our agenda is public comment. Do we have a sign-up sheet? No sign-up sheet? So then, is there anybody that would like to give public comment? Great. As you know, it's 3 minutes. We have some experienced individuals with public comment here, so I don't know that I need to go through the routine.
I'd just like to get a stutter credit, kind of like, you know, some sports you get an extra couple of minutes. Here's this. However, I don't need that much extra time. Here's one each, and here. Thinking about it, I only did 7, but here it is. All right, good morning, council. It's the first time we could say that in 4 years. But anyway, my name, Paul Stickney at 504 228th Ave Southeast. I have a written statement that I will summarize here. I'm speaking in support of either funding or putting in placeholders for 3 studies for the mid-buy that are essential to attain housing balance in the for our city. And they are housing needs analyses and surveys, transportation needs analysis and surveys, and to study the options for picking up a housing balance master plan in the future. On the page, there are 7, 8 list of emails and things handed out. One is the Common Cause Housing Balance book. Another is Lake Sammamish Through Time that I gave all of you last week. And the intent here is to talk about the one word I have trouble with, T word, which is temporal. This cause for housing balance and transportation is past and present and future all at once. It's kind of like the movie Dune, if any of you have seen that. He talks about being able to see the past, the present, and the future. Looking at housing and transportation is a link of what's happened before, where we are today, and then sustainable, recurring cycles of life. To summarize this, as I don't have time to read the whole thing, here are a couple of key things. When evaluated with community character, the environment, our public-built environment, and regional policies and markets, these 3 studies will add important objective underpinnings to make fully informed decisions to optimally lessen the number of additional large single-family homes zoned for citywide and optimally increase the number of smaller and different homes in our town center now, other centers in the future, for sustainable internal housing balance. And having housing balance in the community will not change it through different demographics. It'll just make the city better, allowing our residents to stay in the community over recurring cycles of life. So it's time to recognize, based on these materials, and fully embrace power, might, merit, and advantages that housing balance will bring to Sammamish, and start that process by adding these 3 studies to the mid-buy. That's it.
Thank you, Paul. Council, any comment?
Hey.
No? Next, thank you. Mary? Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for the welcome. My name is Mary Wichter. I live at 408 208th Avenue, Northeast in Sammamish, Washington. Almost forgot my address. So I'm just here to tell you with stormwater, you just don't have enough funding and you need to increase it. You don't have enough staff. You don't have enough projects. You have things that you don't even have on your list that you're going to need to do, and you're going to have to retrofit areas. So I'm not going to talk more about that. I'm going to speak in support of Mr. Stickney's. Housing affordability is not the same as affordable housing. Affordable housing is where you qualify for federal subsidies so that you can actually get into a home. Housing affordability is where you have enough supply in the city so younger people can come into the city, older people can stay in the city. People like firemen and policemen and teachers can live in this city. And we just don't have enough of that. We have way too many giant, big houses. We have too many single-family homes. And with the current moratorium or partial moratorium, you're going to see larger and larger super McMansions built, when you're going to see areas of the city built that have really restricted environmental areas, and you're going to affect the water quality. So I wanted to just, when I first met Paul Stickney a long time ago, I learned something from reading his data. The first thing is for multifamily homes, if you look at, and these are numbers from 2012, Redmond and Issaquah had about 50% multifamily homes. That's condos, townhouses, smaller apartments, that sort of thing. That was in 2012, and as you know, they've been building more of those types of things, both in Issaquah and Redmond. And then Mercer Island, also including Newcastle and Mill Creek, if you know where those areas are, they're actually at about 25 to 30% multifamily homes. So I want you to think about where you think Sammamish is with regard to that. Are we like Mercer Island or what? We only have 6% multifamily homes, and when we annexed Klahani, that made it 10% single-family home, or excuse me, multifamily homes. Because we only had 1,000 units of multifamily in all of Sammamish. And then when we annexed Klahani, we picked up another 1,000 in a master plan community where it was dispersed well and designed well. What we're trying to do is add 2,000 more of those. It's not going to really get us past the 6% to the 10%. We're never even going to catch up to this. And with your moratorium or without your moratorium, the only thing building, because the market's driving people to build, and even people that don't want to build are building, you're just going to see more and more and more single-family homes built, and bigger homes, and the biggest home that you can fit on a lot so people can make it. So I ask now, and I know he's been going to more meetings for a year more than I have for stormwater, you need to do a housing needs analysis. What do we need? What do we not? And you need to do a transit one, which includes car, transit, and multimodal transportation. You need to get money into the budget so you can assign a consultant to study that, and you need to do it now. You get one chance at Town Center. Put the right stuff in it.
Thank you. Is there anyone else that would like to speak? No? Okay, so not seeing anyone else that would like to speak, we can move on to our first item on the agenda, unfinished business regarding the budget. Mr. City Manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So by frame of reference, this mid-buy budget adjustment is an opportunity for us to make minor adjustments to our two-year budget that was adopted last year at this time for 2017 and 2018. These adjustments were vetted and recommended by the Finance Committee, along with some minor adjustments that we made on November 7th. Our budget and our financial position in Sammamish is very strong and is consistently the envy of our neighbors. This is something to be celebrated. Our 2018 ending fund balance is greater than originally planned, while at the same time our revenues per capita and per household are a fraction of our peer cities. The citizens of Sammamish receive great value from their local municipality. As part of our work plan for next year's biennial budget work, we are planning to have a fundamental discussion related to the size and service that people expect to receive from Sammamish. It is a balancing act, blending fiscal responsibility and prudence with service expectation and demands from our citizens. Our work will continue in this area. So without further ado, let me turn things over to our Finance Director, Aaron Anton.
All right, so just first off, just a reminder of where we are in the process. So we began this back in September 20 with the city manager's final review of the request, and we've gone through November 21st was the original time where we're looking at the second reading. The first reading was November 7th, and we are at the 28th today for final review. In walking through that, we've already had both the public hearings on the property tax ordinance and the first reading of the budget ordinance itself. So those happened on 11/7. We're now at the 28th and reviewing the list of council inputs. So as we get to those items, some of these came up at the meeting on the 21st. Some of these were added as council directed at that meeting. We just didn't get to the budget ordinance portion of that meeting, so that's why we're here tonight. So this is the full list of requests that have come in since the first reading. And we can start to look through this. Communications funding, the $200,000. So the far right column is showing the impact on the ending fund balance. So those numbers that are in negative there, it's an expenditure increase, so it's a negative impact to the fund balance. So fund balance is going down if you increase the expenditures. So communications funding was in there. At the 11/21 meeting, there was a request for an art sculpture. That was $50,000. There was a housing balance study. We heard a little bit more about that actually just a minute ago. The placeholder in there was the $200,000 for that study. Had several other requests on hiring, council medical benefits. So as a process, if you want to walk through this list and provide staff direction on these items, that would be appreciated.
Okay, also at this particular point in time, we'd like to ask the chair of the Finance Committee to discuss basically your process and what you went through to vet the budget adjustments.
Good suggestion.
Thank you. Our process is, we had, as you well know, we had a mini retreat on finance. At that point, we took that information and we went back to the committee. And the overall conclusion from that finance committee meeting is that we would do minor budget adjustments for this year. And then with the new council coming on in January, we would then begin working on the budget for the 2019 and 2020 biennium. So the intent was to do minor adjustments, not major activities, and then to move forward on that. So at that point in time, there were some that actually rose to the surface because we had, for example, Eastside Fire and Rescue. We had budgeted a particular increase. That increase was more than expected, so there was a budget adjustment for that. There were a number of other budget adjustments that just normally came to the surface. We then came back to the council with a recommendation for those budget adjustments. And I think we've all seen that. I don't know if you have a slide that particularly looks at that one that you could show at this point in time to remind the council of what those budget adjustments were.
So we could go back and pull up, that basically
fine.
was
You
the
don't have
November
to.
7th presentation. So if anybody's looking at that online, they can see that as part of the PowerPoint on November 7th.
That's fine. We can, we can look at that later. I think we've seen that enough times, but just to refresh everybody's mind. And then we came back to discuss this, and then there were other things that were brought up in terms of budget adjustments. Again, trying to keep this minor, trying to keep it open so that the next council can begin to prioritize what their goals are rather than this current council imposing goals on that council.
Any other Finance Committee comments? Any other members that might want to comment?
Christine, anything?
Nope, she
No?
summed it up well.
Okay. Did you want to, I want to ask the question about the budget adjustments themselves. Does anybody have any questions about them? Did they go through, or the list, was this enough? Because I actually did come up with, on the budget adjustments, the questions that were in here. I just wanted some clarification.
You mean
A
the
couple
ones that
things.
were proposed by the finance committee?
Right, by the
The
Finance
Finance
Committee.
Department?
The summary, well, this is the summary of the biennial budget adjustments.
Right, okay. here it is.
3 is what
Yes.
you're talking about?
Yes.
I just, the council packet software maintenance, that reminded me of council member, or Deputy Mayor Malchow was doing a PDF pilot to see what it would be like not to have the packets delivered to the city. Is that going along well? That just made me think of this.
Actually, I believe it is going well.
Well, I haven't gotten it yet, so just to clarify. but-
Staff is working through that process. So Melanie, would you like to weigh in on this? Because Melanie's been doing the bulk of the work.
Sure. So we are going through our training with the consultant right now as to how because we have to do some back-end work, but we are hopeful. We've done a few packets electronically. We just haven't gone live with them yet because we're not really happy with the way everything is. But our plan is that we hope to do the December meeting and have it available electronically. We'll still do the paper packet. And then we need some time to train the staff on how they're going to use it. But once we get it up and running, it's just going to be like an app on your iPad, and it'll be super simple to use. And we hope to really be going live with it January.
Okay. I just wondered if we were going to do a pilot when we talked about that, if there was a status of it at this point, and you could actually look at a savings, because that's the end result of doing that is actually the savings. So hopefully you'll have a number. Okay, thank you. I see some other questions coming up. Maybe I'll pass my questions over to Councilmember Hornish and then Gerund.
Yeah, and I'm focused on Exhibit 3, and then I want to come back to this, but I think we save the questions until we walk through the items on here right now. Fair enough? All right. I just wanted to confirm the 180,000 increase for EFR, that's on top of the built-in increase that you had into the 17-18
That's correct.
biennium, right? Okay,
That's what
just
we
wanted to
just-
make
yes.
sure. Okay. And then I was just a little bit, I guess the one question I have, it's not on here. The biggest number is the 300,000 for Unified Development Code. I guess I'm okay with it going into the budget, but it won't be spent unless the new council allows it or approves it, correct?
Correct, that would be a placeholder.
So we don't need to
have
discuss
not-
whether or not
yeah.
it's still a good idea to do that or not. All right,
Right.
I won't bring that up then. And then a couple minor things were the number of credit cards. I mean, it's like 75,000 increase. That's a lot of extra credit cards, right? Is that fees? Is that for number of people, or what was that increase?
Those are the fees charged by the bank for using credit cards.
Can we look at another option? That seems excessive to me.
Well, we've also built that into our fee structure, and we've considered it as a cost of doing business. more and more people are using credit cards to conduct their business.
Well, and I understand that
So-
just because of record keeping and everything, but there's other banks that offer no-fee credit cards, and I would just say, look at that opportunity.
Just a point of
This is-
clarification. It's people coming into the desk paying their permit fees with a credit card.
Oh, I'm
not
sorry.
staff.
So it's the 2% carry that we have. Okay, that makes sense. Now I
Of
understand.
the transaction costs.
And we did discuss,
No, okay, yeah.
discuss at the Finance Committee whether it would be appropriate to increase the cost.
That's just the cost to do
the-
it. That I
Well,
understand.
No,
Okay.
what I'm saying is if you were to pay your state sales tax with a credit card, you have to also pay on top of that the fee. And we discussed that, and we decided that we wouldn't do that at this point in
Okay,
time.
and I'm on board. That makes sense to me. All right, got it. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Jaron.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the laminated route route ID service, which is 50,000, where are we on the laminated route route study? We're working with the university.
It's progressing slowly. We don't have any results at this particular point in time, but they are on board, and we're calling upon them. We can provide you with an update at the next council meeting if you'd like.
Well, did we have any money in the budget before this, or is this the 50,000?
We did not have money in the budget. However, we've been spending money, for example, for investigation through our arborist funding if there is laminated root rot suspected. So we've been using the other money that we have not actually budgeted for this particular project. But we'd be happy to report back to council on the status of that next week if you'd like.
Well, you can report next year, actually,
Okay. Okay.
when you have more results from the university. Thank you.
Great. Next, we have Councilmember Valderrama.
Well, ironically, that was the one that I had circled and trying to understand also the difference between this 50,000 on the service kits and what the University of Washington, or is this augmenting that?
Aaron, do you know the answer to that? The difference
Yeah, this
between
is for specifically for the ID service, is my understanding. Community development might be able to provide additional detail on that.
I believe that this is actually that is a separate carve out from the study. This is to identify specific areas that may or may not have laminated root rot. So as trees come down, we're able to analyze them. So this is a little bit different than that ID kit.
So this augments what they're doing,
yeah.
and will this be done by the University of Washington also to make sure that it's all in sync, or how will that be done?
At this particular point, we have not decided how we're going to do that, but we want to have them involved so that if there are protocols coming from, let's say, another arborist, that the protocols would match what information that they need.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have Councilmember Odell.
Thank you. I'm still on Exhibit 3 on the first page on it. There are a number of things on here. Two of them are related to the crosswalks out here in the parking lot. And frankly, as I walk in and out of the city parking lot, I don't see the big problem on why this has to be done this year. And I'm wondering if it could be deferred a year or so.
Actually, there are problems out there, and it would be best to address them now before the problems get worse. If we basically have a window of opportunity, probably next summer to do it, I would suspect that if we go through this winter and if it's a difficult winter as we expect, that we're going to see further deterioration. If council next year decides that after this winter, things are not as bad as we fear they will be, then, we have not let the contract, we have budgeted for it. And in staff's judgment, we will be needing to do that. We've got many areas that are breaking down. And the more traffic that we get on it, we also have some safety issues with some major cracking and surfaces coming up. So we think it would be prudent to budget for those improvements.
Okay, the next item I had is the police services study. Can that be deferred? Why does it have to be next year?
Certainly could be deferred, but council direction that we've received thus far is that it would be important for us to do that particular study to inform us as we go forward. And it would also provide input to our budget work next year, looking at options that we might have. Police services and fire services are our two highest expenditures. Mm-hmm. So if we can learn something from this study, we think that it would be money well spent.
Okay. The last item is on the next page, there's a vehicle for a staff member performing the stormwater locate function. And as I went through the detail on the budget, I kept seeing vehicles here, there, and elsewhere. I'm wondering if there is a one sheet that has the vehicles that are planned to be purchased all in one place as opposed to trying to find them one by one?
We can provide you with that, but we do not have that with us today.
Do you know the number in total?
I'd have to defer to the finance department.
So I'm looking at page 45 of the budget line item adjustment as well. All the footnote there for 17 and 18 lists the different equipment being purchased out of the fleet fund, and then the vehicle identification numbers. As far as a full look at all vehicles and equipment for the city, we could bring back another list of all fleet if that's the council's interest.
Okay, thank you, and I missed that. The last thing I had is under the City Council Department expenditures on Exhibit 4, page 6.
I wanted to stay on Exhibit 3 if we could right now. We'll come back because I have some on the other exhibits as well.
Okay.
So questions on Exhibit 3? Are you done then, Councilmember Odell? Okay, Councilmember Valderrama and then Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, Councilmember Odell triggered my mind on two things. First of all, on the police study that we had talked about, when we had met in the Public Safety Committee, the original guise of it seemed to be reorganized to get bigger. If we're going to do this study, I think that we should be looking on how do we optimize services, especially given the size of that budget. So if this is going to be put in, that it not be looking at all of our wants, but what are our needs and how can we go back and fit it in, just as we're trying to push Eastside Fire and Rescue into that type of process. So hopefully that'll refocus. And the other issue on the parking and the repairs that are going to be taking place, I'd be interested to see if we're also going to be reaching out to the Y and to the library to see if their participation will be involved in this, given that we share some of that utilization. So that would be beneficial to be able to go back to them. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor Malchow and then Councilmember Hornish.
In light of what transpired last week, the Town Center Regional Stormwater Study, I want to get an idea of timing on that. With the developer moving forward and talking about regional stormwater, will our study be completed in advance of them moving forward with their plans? Are we working in tandem on that, or are they working on their own project while we're doing a study? And
The intent is to work in tandem with them, but I'll let our Public Works Director, Steve Lenishevsky, answer that directly.
Good morning. Different than saying good evening. Steve Lenishevsky, Public Works Director. So we will work towards working together. There's no guarantee, right? Because there's nothing in our standards that says they have to. I think they want to, and I know we all want to, so we will do our best to work in concert. And it has been very slow on the uptake as we've been in kind of limbo for a month or so. So we will definitely work on that. The intent, though, is to run on our own program, but include them. They have information that we are hopeful they'll share, as well as vice versa once we get moving. So the spirit of interest I think they have, but there's no guarantee. And I
And
won't
they
say
have,
that.
they have actually said that they would like to participate with us and work together with us on this. So I don't think that that's going to be an issue.
Okay.
Okay, Councilmember Hornish.
Yeah, I'm just coming back. I had a little difficulty with the pluses and minuses and the negatives. And you have positives above the line, and then you put them in parentheses to show negative impact to the budget. So I was a little confused on some of the line items. Just as an FYI, it would have been nice to show the line items as a negative versus waiting until you get to the bottom line to the negatives. You see what I'm saying? Because I couldn't figure out if they were positive or negatives for each line item. But anyhow, having said that, looking at the bottom line, we've got a net reduction in ending fund balance of 218 of $1.4 million. Is all of that in the operational side, or is it some in the this is the struggle I'm having is trying, and I had asked, and I don't think I've seen it yet, is a comparison to what we talk about on the crossover for operations and an operational budget, as well as a CapEx or capital investment type of investment, so I can relate the two. And I really struggle with how this is presented to know what's operational and what's capital. So of the 1.4 decrease in net in ending fund balance, how much of that is operational? Do you know?
Yeah, so the fund number is at the beginning of each one of those line items. So as you're going through Exhibit 3, those first 3 digits, so 340 identifies the capital in transportation. It's a 300 series would be all capital. So 301, 340, or 302 for parks. In this case, there's only a 301 and 340 that are requesting adjustments. So those are capital. So as you go through that, the account number series, that first 3 digits identifies what fund is involved, whether it's an operating fund or a capital fund. So 001, the general fund, is all the operating fund.
So the 1.4 is all general fund, Tom?
No.
No,
it's not.
so you see a total for the general fund.
Right.
If you went to Exhibit 3, that 981,628 for one time, 488,700 for the ongoing.
Say that again. I lost you.
So first page on Exhibit 3 at the bottom gives you a subtotal just for the general fund.
Got it.
Then you flip it over on the back side, you have the street fund, 101. That's the only adjustment that's going on in the street fund right now. So that's an operating fund. Then you hit the stormwater fund. That's your proprietary utility fund. So 408 and 438. It's the operating side of the stormwater and the capital side of the stormwater. So it gives you subtotals for each of those funds. So it's built off of the state fund requirements, bars of current.
So I'm trying to simplify this. The only capital there is stormwater capital funds for the 438 fund and the 340 transportation CIP cancels each other, right? It's just a transfer. And the general government CIP 301, 103,000. Those are the only capitals that are not operating. So if you net all that, you've got a negative 350 and a negative 100. So about $1 million in the operating and 400 in the capital. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Of the difference of these adjustments. Okay, that's what I really wanted to understand. Thank you.
So keeping in mind, too, that this is the November 7th package that you're reviewing. So this is, the Exhibit 3 is the summary up through November 7th. It does not include any of the items here.
That's why I'm asking the question. And it's from the original 17-18 biennium that
Correct.
these changes.
These are the
Okay,
adjustments
yep,
to
yep.
that, yes.
Okay, are there any further questions on Exhibit 3? I would like to make one quick, this is more of just an informational comment, and since Eastside Fire and Rescue is mentioned in some of the adjustments here, as we've been going through ongoing discussions, there was a discussion regarding the inspection fee and increasing the inspection fee possibly in Sammamish. That's just a reminder that if we haven't gone further, that might be something that needs to be actually put on the books. I'm not sure sometimes when the EFR board representatives, when we have the discussions about it, what the staff's corresponding actions would be. And that was one of the ones that that came up, that there was questions about, were we undercharging for EFR inspection fees?
We did talk about that in the Finance Committee, so they can give you a response to
Great.
that.
Okay, perfect. So if you're, really, my question was if you're following up with it. That if you are, then we're good.
Yes, we are following up.
Great, thank you. All right, so there from Exhibit 3, we're done there. So next, would it be our Finance Director, Anton, would we go to the council inputs? Should I just cover that again? Is there any questions on the council inputs?
I think it might be helpful to go through each one of these and actually discuss them, and then have perhaps deliberation on each one of these as we go forward, and basically take a vote, thumbs up, thumbs down, pass, look at it later, whatever is the council's pleasure.
Okay, well then let's go ahead and start with the first one on the communications funding. Is there any staff discussion on that issue? Should we start right with the council? Okay, first is Councilmember Huckabee, and then Deputy
I
Mayor.
actually had a question before we got into the detail.
Okay.
My question was, given what is happening on Snake Hill and all the changes that are happening over there, are there some budget adjustments that we need to put into place because of the changes and the extra cost for that work before we get into the detail of council wish list?
Well, from my perspective, actually, we have sufficient reserves to cover the issue. That is going to be coming back to you, I believe, on the 12th of December for an update and budget adjustment on that. But we have built in sufficient contingencies.
So you're saying we'll have a budget adjustment, another budget adjustment for that
Well,
purpose?
it won't actually be. It'll be an adjustment to the
To the
project,
reserves.
And the ending fund balance.
and the ending fund balance will.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's another adjustment.
Well, yeah, exactly. It will be an adjustment to that particular project, but there is sufficient contingency built into the budget to cover that.
But if I'm hearing you correctly, there will be a change to the ending fund balance as a result of that conversation?
Actually,
Or no?
technically no, because there are sufficient contingencies
Okay.
within the fund.
Okay, I thought I heard you say that there would be an adjustment
Sorry.
there. Okay, that's okay.
I may have misspoken.
Okay, now the questions are related to the council inputs, correct? Okay, Councilmember Valderrama and then Gerard.
No, it's me, actually.
Oh, I'm sorry, Deputy.
I'll go, but I haven't pushed my button yet.
We're going through communications funding is where we are right now. Okay, we'll do the exhibits after this.
I just had a question, excuse me, about what Lyman said about Snake Hill. Which reserves are you pulling that out of? Because we have a whole series of reserves.
Believe that is within the transportation fund itself. 340 should have sufficient.
Okay, so
reserves.
the other reserves won't be tapped for that.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
That affects the overall ending fund balance.
All of them.
He just said no, and that's what
Well, it
puzzles
does.
me.
I'm sorry.
Within the contingencies.
Well, the ending fund balance assumes we've spent all of the reserve. you see.
Correct.
Yeah, that's fair.
So
Yeah,
if we
yeah.
don't spend it,
Yeah.
usually the next year, then the fund balance is
Carried
adjusted
over.
higher.
Yeah.
I get that, but given what's going on to Snake Hill, are we going to blow right through that?
We don't believe that we will.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
stay tuned.
Okay, we are now, I think, getting to the communications, and Deputy Mayor Malchow is first up here.
I still have a question about Snake Hill, too. Do you have a general idea of what the ask is going to be on the 12th?
Look at what you started.
Steve, do you want to? We do, but honestly, it's less than we feared.
Okay, well, that's good.
And I also, at this particular point in time, would be wary of showing our hand because we're still negotiating
Okay,
with
that's
the
fair. That's fair.
contractor.
But we've already increased it to 120, 150.
No, we did.
So we had an original contingency of 750,000 built into the original.
Oh, fair
contract
enough.
amount,
Okay.
And
Okay.
we
We just
asked for an
authorized to
additional
spend
of
that. Yeah. Okay. Got it.
Okay, that's fine. If we don't, yeah, that's fine. I'll move on to communications.
Okay, you're
Sorry, I
up.
just want to give Steve some exercise. So I know I've asked this question before on communications funding, but I'm trying to parse out exactly what that $200,000 is for. So when I talked about communications funding, it was specific to the website. So is this website specific, or what is that exactly?
That essentially is a placeholder at this particular point in time.
Okay. With an eye towards
with an
the
eye
website.
primarily to the website,
Okay.
and then some ancillary improvements in that particular function.
When you
So-
say ancillary improvements to the website.
to the website and or some social media work, et cetera. We have not fully vetted or scoped what this is going to be, but we think this is a fair judgment for the short-term actions that were recommended by the consultant.
Okay.
But again, primarily that is to bring the website into making it functional.
Okay.
That is the number one priority.
Councilmember Hornish.
I just wanted to voice that I'm supportive of this as a budgetary holding, and then we'll get to the specifics to spend.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, I wanted to say I'm supportive of it as a placeholder. My concern wasn't the initial effort on the website somewhere over $60,000, $80,000? So I can go into
It was $65,000, and it was primarily foundational. It was a technical side of it without the content side. And so now this would primarily go into bringing the content up to date, up to speed.
although this is 3.5 times. I understand it's a placeholder to go through, but it is significantly more than the initial investment. But the next council would then look at this and then be able to break it up and right size it.
Right. We will come back with a plan on how that money would be spent.
Okay.
Okay. I have a question. I thought, number one, that the consultant had suggested that we increase the FTEs in the communications
Yes, they did.
area.
Yes, they did.
So is that contemplated in this 200,000, or is that another issue?
A piece of that may be there, but we want to look at that. I believe we are carrying about 1.5, and the consultants thought that perhaps a two-person would be the appropriate amount, but we want to look at that more closely. But there is a potential piece of that would be salaries.
Okay. And then my second question really goes to the IT part of this, because we're talking about the website and the functionality of the website. But one of the things that most people have commented on in my presence has been regarding the search capabilities. And the search capabilities is not necessarily the website. It's the content management and the database that we're using and the ability to manage the data, which maybe in my, there's just a confusion of terms, but that's more of an IT function than really the website function in my mind. And so is this the content management side and the search engine that we're looking at, is that included in this $200,000?
Yes, it is. It's all inclusive.
Okay, very good. Any other questions on item one? No? Well, then did we get a thumbs up on this one?
You haven't taken a vote yet.
So should we actually have a hands up vote? I know there
I
was
think it
some.
might. I think it might be.
I think
helpful.
that'd be good because
hands.
Yeah, let's do hands up then. All those in favor of this placeholder, please raise your hands.
No thumbs?
7-0. It passes. Let's now move to item number 2, consider additional funding for art sculpture. Councilmember Valderrama, would you like to speak to that quickly?
Yeah, we've had this presentation made to us several times of this unique artwork that they're working on. It will have public engagement, as they had stated. It will celebrate the city and its involvement with the kokanee, the eagles, and the urban forestry management of all that we're being leaders of. We have been supportive of their art projects in the past, and we'll get to revisit it with public engagement. I'm very supportive and excited by the artwork that's being presented.
Very good. I see a question from Councilmember Gerand.
It's not a question. I'm supporting the 50,000 also. As a follow-on, though, let's remember that they requested something like 250,000 reserve. So I suggest that the next council consider what they should do on an ongoing basis for supporting municipal art.
I think there are many communities that provide for municipal art as a percentage of development fees and a variety of other techniques that are used. But I think some certitude, I agree with Councilmember Jaron, I think some certitude going forward would really be helpful.
Councilmember O'Dell.
Well, I'm going to pile on that. I think for a couple of things. First of all, we have a long list of things to look at here, and it adds up to a lot of money. The second thing is we have this plus the what was just mentioned in terms of the increase that's in the works for next year from the Arts Commission. And frankly, I would like to suggest that the whole art issue is a subject for discussion for the next council. And I would hope that they would go into it and do a top-to-bottom review of what the Arts Commission is doing, and is that in line with the desires of the new council. Frankly, I came into office 8 years ago, and we're thinking about having a town clock out here. And that was about as expensive as this, if I recall. And at that time, it was saying, well, that's a nice-to-have item, but perhaps there are other things the money should be spent on. And frankly, I would defer including this in the budget going forward until we get to the end and see what the total bill is, and then go back and make a judgment. Thank you.
Okay, I see no other comments right now on this one. I do have to say, first off, I think the Arts Commission actually has done some incredible work with a very small budget.
Yes,
they have.
Really contributed a lot to the city, and I would be supportive of this as well. I know that Councilmember O'Dell asked that we defer this, but I think we should go ahead and vote. If you want to defer, then vote no, and we can talk about it later. So all those in favor of allotting the $50,000 to the art sculpture, please raise your hand for aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand. By your vote of 6-1, the $50,000 passes. Okay, housing balance study during 2018. Councilmember Jaron, would you like to speak to this?
Yes, thank you. I think today we heard again from our astute citizens as to the need for a housing needs analysis. And I'm not sure housing balance study is a pretty broad term, but we do need a specific needs analysis. As was pointed out, we have a whole lot of residential, a lot of them are McMansions, and the way we're zoned right now, we're likely to get more of those. But we did our vision for the town center, and as I relayed in an email last night, our vision for the town center was to take some of the pressure off of the rest of the city and provide more density in the town center, mainly multifamily, which would go towards the needs for the anecdotal needs for citizens that work in our city, that come into work and can't find a place to live. But going beyond anecdotal, we really do need a study of both the economic and demographic needs. And clearly, as I expressed last night, the vision for the Jaron family is to stay in Sammamish, and we're hoping that there will be some available housing that meets our needs in the future. And I think that a detailed needs analysis is really important at this time, especially with the timing with the town center moving forward. Thank you.
Great. I see Deputy Mayor Malchow, and then Councilmember Valderrama, and then Councilmember Hornish.
So I have some questions. I'm trying to understand exactly what we've earmarked in here because the sheet that Mr. Stickney was kind enough to leave us with has 3 studies: a housing needs analysis and statistically valid survey, a transportation needs analysis, and then this housing balance master plan. So, and we have housing balance study. So I'm saying that that's more like this study of housing balance master plan, but I'm not sure what we're studying here. Can someone help me out? I don't know what $200,000 is getting us. Which one of these 3, or is this all 3? I don't know. Does anyone know?
Well, I think the request I had was putting in a $200,000 placeholder and expect the next council to flesh it out with perhaps a consultant's or staff's estimate for the actual needs analysis and the other studies. Subsequent to a housing needs analysis is the suggestion that you might want a transportation needs analysis based on your outcome from the housing needs analysis. So I would view the 200,000 again as a placeholder. We're putting more
We'll
pressure
decide
on
later
the
what it
future
is.
council.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, Councilmember Valderrama.
Yes, I'm supportive of this. 5 years ago, we had an economic development study done in consultants that came here, and as part of that study, they had pointed out to us the housing imbalance that we had and that we had to do this study. So this is a long time coming. It's something that we need, that we're having more pressures put on our city. I think it would alleviate that. It would also allow retiring council members to stay in Sammamish so we don't have to go to Trilogy or the Highlands to visit them. So as far as the transportation needs analysis, just my interpretation of this, and I could be wrong, was that we were going to take whatever the transportation master plan came, and after this was done, be able to relook at that, was my interpretation. I could be wrong on that. But I think this is needed, and I'm supportive of it. Thank you.
Oops. I think we need to go back.
We go back, yeah.
Thank you. Oh, wrong way. There we go. Okay, next we have Councilmember Hornish and then Odell.
Yes, just to be blunt, I am not supportive of this because I don't know what the end result is. Although I do believe we should maybe do a study because I don't think we have a good housing balance. I will grant you that. But I'm really struggling with 10 years ago, we put a plan into place for the town center. It is what it is. We may or may not like it. Things may have changed. But if we're going to do a housing balance study, and that's going to require a change, we're going to start all over again on a 10-year process for the town center. So I don't see the need to put a placeholder for $200,000 to rethink a plan that we put in place 10 years ago. I see it. I just don't know what we could do about it at this point, other than we start over again on the town center, and that makes no sense to me. Whether or not you agree with the town center, you don't agree with the town center, it just doesn't matter. That's the plan we're going down, and we need to stick with that plan versus spending more money to study it again.
Councilmember Odell.
Well, I'm going to pile on Councilmember Hornish here. I agree with everything he has said. We had 2,200 housing units slated to come into town center. Supposedly, that was going to take care of a lot of our problems. If we decide that that number is insufficient, then basically we're back to square one with the town center plan. And I don't want to do that. Number 2, if we do a housing balance study, what are we really going to get out of it? If we do it on the basis of who's here today, the people who are here today are already being accommodated, so that result will look probably like what we're look like today. If we look at a broader area of the people who would like to live in Sammamish but can't afford to, you might get a different result. But that little issue is not defined in what this exercise here. Number 3, We are not a centrally planned economy. The Russian bloc and the Sino bloc have done a lot of centralized planning, and very frankly, having traveled to those areas early on, I didn't like what I saw of it, and frankly, I don't want it here. If we do come up with a plan, how are we going to implement it? Are we going to force a lot of upzoning? As far as, and you know, maybe that's what people want. This particular council member doesn't really like that option. We were showing numbers for Redmond, Issaquah, Mercer Island, but we weren't showing numbers for Clyde Hill or Hunts Point or some other areas that are around like Madrona, which are fairly upscale as well. If people want to live in a lower cost area, those options are available within an easy drive of the city boundary. As far as inside the boundary goes, I am not in favor of dictating what a new development looks like from the standpoint of the number of units there. If we want to provide low-cost housing, we can take an R4 lot and turn the number of square feet that are buildable on it into something less than what's being built. That'll get rid of the McMansion problem. As far as retiring council members go, this council member retired his mortgage a long time ago, so I am just fine, thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Huckabee.
Yeah, I don't think whether we have mortgages or not has anything to do with it.
That's a lot.
Not really. My concern here, and the reason that I would vote no on it at this point in time, is I think it needs a lot more fleshing out. What is the intended consequence? Is it only going to impact the town center? Is the intent to upzone? Is the intent to reduce the amount of square footage and increase setbacks? Just what is it that you intend to get out of this? Because I agree, we've talked for years in wanting to have more cottage housing. We've only had 1 or 2 developments of cottage housing at this point in time. So how does that housing balance, which says we need smaller homes and more affordable homes, what is the intent, and how does that study enable us to change code so we get what we would like to have here in the city? And I don't quite at this point see the connection. And to Councilmember Valderrama's point, I think this transportation needs analysis looks at cars, transit, and multimodal. And I think at this point in time, what we need to be looking at is how do we insist that Metro make our transit more efficient, because it certainly runs through Sammamish virtually empty. And I think there's some things that we can look at here that have been suggested that we can address without having to pay for a study, because we know what some of the problems are and we can address them without that study. And then at the retreat next year, the new council can figure out what their goals are in terms of housing, zoning, transit, and other issues, and help shape those studies so that they get the answers that will help them define the direction they're going to take in the future.
Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Thank you. So I want to caveat my comments with the fact that I certainly support having a balance in our community. I think we recognize that we don't have enough of that multifamily housing, but that is the town center. Most of what's coming into the town center is not single-family homes. And I think Councilmember Hornish put it best, is what's the end goal here? Yeah. And the end goal is increased densification and likely height limitations that go up. And I'm just not sure that's congruent with what our city wants now and what was stated previously when the town center plan was put in. I would also have concerns that we lose that wedding tier effect, that was the goal, is to kind of blend into the single family home neighborhoods that exist on the outskirts. And if we're changing what that all looks like, you may not have a very good transition. And I think Councilmember Hornish also made a good point about redoing the town center plan. We fall back on that plan all the time with moving forward. So I'm not sure why we would want to go back and redo that entire town center plan. That was a huge public process, and that would be a years and years worth of a delay in the town center, frankly.
Okay, Councilmember Valderrama.
I don't have my light on.
Your city manager does.
Oh, I'm sorry. I usually don't go that far.
I just wanted to remind the council that next year we do have the housing strategic plan that we are going to be working on. So parts of what may be included in this $200,000 placeholder could be incorporated in that. We're working with Arch to update our housing strategic plan, and that may yet then inform the council with or the next council with further direction that they may want to go, perhaps expand it into other areas, et cetera. So I just thought I'd remind council that we do have that on the work plan for next year. But it is not precisely what is being proposed here.
And Lyman, that's in the budget now, right?
Currently in the budget and planned.
Councilmember Gerand, and then Odell.
Lyman, I was just wondering where we are in terms of the study that Planning Commission was working on in terms of setbacks from arterials and buffers between new subdivisions and existing neighborhoods, because the thought here was that if indeed we're trying to limit the number of McMansions, I don't think you're going to be able to limit it to affordable small houses on big lots. That's naive to think that way.
I think that time has passed us, yes.
So my vision was something like what I really enjoyed in Europe, and that was the ability to walk between housing developments on public-owned easements or property, and the concept of effectively downzoning. We did a downzoning when we went from gross density to net density in most of the city. Another effective downzoning would be to increase setbacks and to require easements for public use as new developments come in to both buffer old developments and increase the pedestrian and perhaps bicycle connectivity within the city. So I'm not sure where that study remains right now. Where is it?
I believe that the Planning Commission has had some initial conversation on that. I don't believe that the final conclusion has been made, but I can let council know where they are in that particular process. We can report back.
I would suggest that connects in with the housing strategic study that you'll be doing apparently next year.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, next is Councilmember Odell, and then Valderrama.
Well, before I make my comment, there is a budget item next year too for, let's see, what was it? A code overhaul of the codes, building codes. So what Councilmember Jerem was just talking about could be wrapped into that as well, frankly, because that eventually it all winds up in a code somehow. But what I really pushed my button for was there was a mention of a transportation needs analysis, and frankly, to me, that's what the TMP is all about. So I don't think we need to think about adding additional money at this point for this, because that's the objective of the whole TMP. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, you were mentioning the housing strategy that's coming forward. One of the things that I thought that would come out of that strategy, which could affect this, is that we could analyze after that strategy is done, not just what is in the town center plan, as was recommended 5 years ago. The plan was about 10 years ago, but it would help inform the next council as far as if we have to look at dimensions that we can set on standards of homes and looking at that type of approach towards it, and that might be able to be a useful way. And this placeholder, again, would be revisited by the next council and seeing what needs to augment that for it. Thank you.
Okay, there's no more questions, so I'd like to just add a few comments. First off, this is rather vague. I mean, it's admirable. I think just the discussion that we had right now is actually good to emphasize the need for this. I think we had public comment earlier that was somewhat of a study, even though it was on just cards that were held up. I think the 6 to 10% of multifamily dwelling units in Sammamish is indicative of the conversations that went on in 2000 and 2001 on the Planning Advisory Board with Arch when they were talking about what our affordable housing needs were in the city, that it was really obvious that single-family homes are the predominant structures that we have in Sammamish, and the town center plan really did address that. I think that was brought up, that it really did look at that, and those 2,200 homes, I think we need to be reminded not just to look at the homes because in the town center, because that's a long term. They're going to come sooner than what we think, but they're still not going to be here tomorrow. This is a long-term investment in the community, and it is layered. I think the wedding cake concept was brought up by an early planning commissioner, Scott Hamilton, I believe was one of the people that talked about layering the town center so that we had the density in the center and it moved out into our community. We protected the character of the neighborhoods and the single-family homes, that we would protect those areas with the town center. I'm pleased to say that many of us were there turning the shovel in the first property in the town center not that long ago. And since then, not only do we have Metropolitan Market, but recently Overlake opened up an urgent care facility that is helpful in the health of our entire community. That's what the town center is going to represent. There's orthodontics and dental offices in the town center. They're open today. There's new financial organization, credit unions. So it's not only the physical health of our community and the kids, the high percentage of kids that are in Sammamish, but the families with their financial needs and financial health with the credit union that just opened up, First Tech Credit Union, I think, just opened up there. So those are the kinds of things that the town center represents. It's not just the 2,200 homes, it's the single-family homes that exist in Sammamish today, and the services that they'll be providing to them. So I just wanted to make that comment. This, again, is vague. I do want to ask for some clarification. I think it was stated earlier that are we looking to exclude lower income or lower affordable housing in Sammamish, that they can go outside of Sammamish? Is that the statement? I'd actually like to ask the council member if that was what he was talking about, that we should not be encouraging affordable housing in Sammamish.
What I was saying is, I think the pressure is somewhat mitigated by the fact that immediately on our boundaries, we're having massive construction projects in both Redmond and Issaquah, which will alleviate to some extent the pressure within the city itself.
So you weren't saying that we shouldn't have affordable housing long-term in our city, just we don't need it right now because
What
the
I
other
was saying
cities...
is,
Poor people can go elsewhere.
what I was saying is, yes, I could say people can go elsewhere. People can go elsewhere anytime they want to, Kathy. It doesn't mean we have to accommodate everybody in the city, particularly if it changes the character of the city in any way, shape, or form. I remind you that a lot of us moved here as opposed to going to Bellevue because we didn't like what Bellevue is becoming. Frankly, I don't like what some of the other areas are becoming either. And I want to have it not happen here if possible. Some of it's coming anyway. 2,200 units in Sammamish in the town center. We also have the Habitat for Humanity project across the street on 228th, assuming that gets built finally one of these days. And there will be others like that around. We're not doing any low-cost housing. What I'm saying is I just don't think it should become an overwhelming priority for this city. I would prefer to let the market drive what's built here. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And so on that particular one, I think we need to get a hands up for this one. So all those in favor of, I'm sorry, Councilmember Huckabee.
Just a quick comment. I think some of the affordable housing conversation definitely the new council will need to look at, because there are some tremendous changes going on right now in Congress in terms of affordable housing and how that is going to be dealt with. And it's going to change dramatically and probably reduce across the board the ability to build affordable housing. So that strategy may need to be really rethought in this community if we're going to provide affordable housing to anybody. But at this point in time, there's nothing definitive, but I think there should be some good conversations next year.
Great. And now we have Councilmember Gerund.
Just a quick reminder that we've all supported the internal TDR program.
Correct.
And if we want to expand that to more areas that are what we consider critical areas, we have to ask, well, where's the receiving units going to go? And the way we envision it, it's going to go in the town center. So we should keep some flexibility in terms of development regulations and the rest of the city and in the town center. Thank you.
Great. I see no other comments, so we'll call for the vote on this one. All those in favor of this study, please raise your hand. All those opposed? It's the item fails 5-2. And next we'll go to freeze new hires, random reduction in level of service. Councilmember Valderrama, would you like to speak?
Yes, thank you. At the beginning of this year, as in the last a couple of years, we had prioritized that we were going to deal with the financial structural imbalance. We then had scheduled the June retreat. We were not able to address the issues or do any deep dive on it, and it's now been left to the next council. During the workshops and in the meetings, we have talked about the new hires and how the budget has not been looked at for the impending deficit, or as some people call it, that's already here, depending on how you look at it. That said, then what I'd like to do, and it's actually now more in action for the next council, is to again go back and hold on the hires till the next council has the opportunity to look at that. And I wouldn't call it random, I'd call it targeted reductions in level of services based on their analysis to take place.
Oops. Okay, I see Councilmember Hornish and then Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Yeah, I'll be succinct. I'm in support of doing this, but not now. I'd like to wait until we get into the normal biennial budget for 1920.
Deputy Mayor Malchow and then Councilmember Huckabee.
I'm not supportive of this. I think we just talked about communications funding, which may in part have some additional hires in there, but I think that's important because I think our community wants to hear from the city, so I'm not supportive of this.
Councilmember Huckabee and then Odell.
I'm definitely not supportive of this. I think one of the issues that we have is that, particularly in the area of development, we've developed all the easy stuff. We're now working on the hard stuff. And the hard stuff is also all unique, and it takes more time, it takes more energy, it takes more cross communications between the various departments in the city. I think trying to reduce that level of service in some of these areas is, I think it's just foolish because it's not going to get the results that we really want to see. You may want to look at some service reductions. I'm not sure what areas you would be looking at, but I think this, again, is something that should be taken up by the new council to see whether, indeed, levels of service can be reduced. People will, whether the community will accept it or whether the community would prefer to pay a little extra in order to keep the same levels of service.
Councilmember Odell and then Councilmember Valderrama.
I agree with Councilmember Huckabee. I think we should let our citizens drive this. The city manager has a fair amount of discretion in terms of whether he keeps people on the payroll or not. If things turn south, he has the opportunity to, shall we say, downsize either through attrition or through reduction in force. This is a tool for the manager, and I do believe that in looking at the head counts, whether actual or contract, the city has in comparison to other cities that are our peers, we are lean and mean in terms of the number of people we have. As the city grows, there is a direct relationship between that and headcount. If the city stops growing, then obviously the headcount can stop growing too. If the city continues to grow, the headcount should probably go up as well. I am not in favor of this. Thank you.
Okay, I have a little change here. Councilmember Gerund.
Thank you. I'm also not in favor of freezing new hires, but I do feel that we certainly there are areas we can look at in terms of possible reduction in level of service or type of service. For example, in the fire service, we may realize that we don't need 3 fire stations, but we need more aid stations, and there's possibility, because after all, most of the risk to life is in the form of aid response rather than fire response. So I certainly support the city continuing to have the discussion at the partnership level on the type of fire service, and that may result in lower fire personnel but increased aid personnel. I don't think that freezing new hires is the right way to go, though. Thank you.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Dan, I appreciate the comments. And again, my concern is how the budget that was put together was similar to past budgets. What I'm asking for is to hold it approximately 34 days for the new council to come in and evaluate these and be able to start looking at targeted levels of service and their impact, not the random ones, and to be able to see where can we go. So if communications, as we've talked about even before, will be looked at by the next council, and that they'll be able to make that determination. And so right now, given that we're already receiving comments that we're in deficit that have to be looked at by the next council, I think it would be prudent for both that, and maybe we can vote on both, given what I'm hearing, the new hires and the replacements at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Hornish.
Yeah, if we're going to do that, then I have another comment. I think it's along the same lines, but I did not highlight. I just did some quick math on the FTEs that we have in our package, Exhibit 4, and I'm using 2015 as the basis, which was pre-Klahani. We had 80, and I'm just going to do rough numbers. 15,000 on top of the 45 of legacy Sammamish, about 33% increase. So if you take what we had for FTEs of 80 in 2015 pre-Klahani, multiply that times 33%, that's 27 just on a per capita basis that we should have increased the FTE. Now we've gone up in the 2018 proposed budget to, I'm going to round it to 115, that's 35. Not 27. But you have to understand that in that 35 increase, we've also taken part-time employees and made them FTEs. And I think that number was roughly 10, is that correct? So if you subtract the 10 from 35, you get 25. You're right on par with the 27. And I think we're keeping pace with what we need to with the population growth if you take into account the annexations and the growth of Sammamish, and to keep the service level that I think our citizens want and desire. So I don't think we need to do either one of these at this point. And it really comes down to the city manager's discretion to do that.
Okay, our Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Are we voting on both of these or just a singular one?
Thank you for asking the question. I was actually thinking about that before we voted, that should we open this conversation to both, and then we'll vote for both of them?
Well, I have a comment if we're going to do both.
Yeah,
Are we doing
think-
both?
Yes, I'd
would
like
do
to do
both.
that. Yeah, I'd like to do both. So we'll vote on them separately.
Separately,
but-
okay.
but
Then I'm ready to vote.
We're going to do them both
And then
at
I'll
the
come
same
back
time.
and make my comment on the next one. Voting separately or?
Well, I was going to do the vote both at the same time.
Okay,
So
okay.
go
Well, then
ahead.
I'll make my comment.
You're back.
Related.
So I don't support freezing replacement hires. Right now, we don't even have a communications director.
Yeah.
Okay, we desperately need that. I do not support this.
Okay, Councilmember Huckabee.
Yes, also, if for whatever reason, we have some of our maintenance staff that would decide to retire, leave, or whatever else, I think when it comes to snow removal, we might have some major issues if we don't have the appropriate number of staff to take the snow off the ground. So, there you go.
Okay, I think everybody has commented now on both of them. I just want to say myself that while always we need to be watching our budget and the intent of being fiscally responsible here is probably what generated some of these discussions. I think the flexibility by the city manager. We are in flux right now, and we may need to hire people as opposed to freeze them right now with the judgment of what's going on. So I would not be supporting either one of these myself. So with that, let's vote for the first one, the freeze on the new hires. All those in favor of freezing new hires, please raise your hand.
Or 34 days.
All of those that are opposed, please raise your hand. By the vote of 6-1, this fails. The second one, freeze replacement hires. All those in favor, please raise your hand.
Or 34 days.
All those opposed, please raise your hands. By a vote of 6-1, the item fails. Okay, so next we have increased city council medical benefits in 2018. Councilmember Hornish and Malchow may want to comment on this.
I'll start off. I mean, real quick, I had highlighted this at one point when we looked at the compensation for the new council coming in. Not to offend anybody, but the new council is younger, doesn't have government-funded medical benefits that others that are rolling off may have. I think it's something that we should consider as a city as a carrot for future council members as to have medical benefits available potentially. As to the budget impact, I would even open it up, and I would probably propose what this does is, if it's supported, is to push it to the Finance Committee to come up with a potential way of doing it, whether it's funded by the city or just allows the council members to participate and pay for it on their own are two options that could come up, and it could have no financial impact, frankly. So I'm willing to kind of punt this to the Finance Committee to come back, and I'd probably have no financial impact that we need to address right now as to the 18 biennium adjustment would be my take.
I will point out that actually is part of the work plan that we have as staff to bring that forward to the Finance Committee, and that was something the Finance Committee had previously wanted to do. Mm-hmm. So that is in sync.
Okay, Councilmember Odell.
Well, as a departing council member, I won't be participating in this, but I am fully supportive of it.
Councilmember Huckabee and then Valderrama.
One of the reasons that we had not provided the medical benefits in the past is because it was like $12,000 a year and everybody would have to participate, and many people would not use that. Do we have any information at this point in time that you could provide us now?
Sure.
Just kind of an overview of what the situation would be in terms of medical benefits with our current provider?
Yeah, so Association of Washington Cities is the current plan provider for medical coverage. As mentioned previously, for elected officials' participation, the city can choose to pay anywhere from 0 to 100% of the premium. There is a 50% participation requirement, which is what you were suggesting earlier. So you would need to have
50?
60 or 50?
50.
50.
So you would have to have a 4
Because we were told 100
Yeah,
at
so-
the previous.
Yeah.
So were we.
That requirement has changed.
50.
Looks like the association has opened it up to that. Although the medical plans themselves have also changed, right? So it's
2% of the council?
50% of the elected
The
officials.
total
Correct.
employee
Yep.
headcount.
So you need 4. No, it's the council for elected official
Four
plan.
council members would
Four
have to decide that they wanted to carry the coverage.
And then that's medical. For dental and vision, it's 75% participation is required on the dental and vision, and then 100% participation is required on the life and long-term disability insurance programs. So it's a mix and match on what you want to go with, and you'd have to look at those different
And
package options.
currently, council does have dental and vision coverage.
Right.
So as far as an overall pricing, I looked at that based on the 2018 AWC Well City rates. So you recall the city is able to receive the Well City rate, being a Well City plan provider. So if this particular plan was what was chosen, and that is on this page. So for employee only, so this would be a council member only, dental, vision, medical, $785.54 per month. That's $9,426 per year. For all 7 council positions, that's $65,985. So if you're looking for a budgetary ballpark, that's the annual for allowing the eligibility on all 3, dental, medical, and vision. Then if you were to provide full family coverage, not just the employee only, but the council and their family, that's $2293.98 per month, or an annual of $27,527. So for 7, it would be $192,694. So the range there, $65,000 to $193,000 for all 7 to be eligible for that coverage if they were to
Some of that would be
participate.
offset by what's currently being paid for all 7, though, for vision and dental, right?
Correct. The dental and vision pieces.
Relatively minor, though.
Yeah.
Sarah,
So,
what's the last one about
Relatively minor amounts that would be offset, decreased from the numbers. Okay,
Actually, Tom, it's probably more than you think, because I looked into it for COBRA reasons,
really?
and it's not, the vision piece is small, but the dental piece is substantial. It's about $1,000 a month for my wife and myself.
Wow.
yeah, dental insurance is always very expensive in terms of what you get in return for your dollars
Yeah, I
paid,
believe, and so is vision,
unfortunately.
frankly.
So if it's going to be moved to the Finance Committee, I guess what I'm hearing is that it would have to be 4 council members would have to be willing to get the medical. Are there any, I think the other question I have is whether the council members can actually pay for the health care as opposed to the city paying, or if they step up and choose to insure their families, we could require the council member to pay for that, because that would be over and above the cost of insuring the individual council member.
Yeah, I think you have some flexibility there. So this is just through the Association of Washington Cities
Right.
plan as well. So if you're looking outside for a different plan offering other than AWC, so we just used that example to give us a relative
Right.
pricing, so we could kind of look at that, but you could look at other plan options and then what the city would choose to pay versus the participant. Those are all would be open to
So that's a fairly
decide.
meaty discussion for
Yeah.
a finance
Yes.
committee.
A lot of flexibility.
Okay, everybody is lit up right now, so Councilmember Valderrama and Councilmember Gerund.
Yeah, I am supportive of this proposal because I do see the demographics of our council changing, and we want to be able to bring in younger council members and have an incentive for them. Furthermore, as we're seeing, we have a water commissioner now as a council elect, and my understanding is that the water commission has health benefits, and so that way we can also be able to address and lure seasoned talent like our council member elect to the council. Thank you.
Councilmember Gerund, and then Odell.
Thank you. I'm also supportive of this, and I guess we're supporting sending it down to the Finance Committee to flesh it out.
Sending it up
Up-
to the.
oh, okay. Okay. compliments to the Association of Washington City for being more flexible than in the past, because
Yeah.
I agree with Kathy that in the past, I think it required 100%
Percent,
participation.
right.
A lot of cities provide the medical insurance, and I certainly support it. I do feel that for the family coverage, if you can have a plan whereby the family's coverage is paid for by the individual that's getting the coverage from the council, that's something that they should consider when it goes up to the Finance Committee. Thank you.
Councilmember Odell, and then Hornish.
Thanks. I'm looking at a document that we all looked at on October 3rd, Agenda Bill 10, which had Exhibit 5 as an attachment, which at the time and then showed a comparison of cities that offered or did not offer health insurance. And roughly half of them, well, half of them offered something. It was not uniformly medical, dental, and vision. But the larger cities appear to be offering, and this would be Vancouver, Tacoma, Spokane, Everett, et cetera, were offering what looks like comprehensive insurance coverage. The smaller cities, and we're kind of on the borderline between large and small, we're offering something less. But I agree with everything that's been said so far. If we're going to attract the right kind of people to run for this office, it is important. It's one more carrot that we can put out there. People may, if they're full-time employee, there's one council member-elect that works for my old company that has excellent insurance, and he probably doesn't need it. But there are other council member-elects that probably could very well use this, or it might just save them a whole lot of money. So I think this does need to be fleshed out. I do have a question, though, that if this does get kicked to the Finance Committee, will the council members elect be able to participate, or are they going to fall off the calendar?
This is not considered compensation as such, direct compensation, so the benefits are not subject to the election rules.
Okay, good. All right, thank you.
Councilmember Hornish, and then Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Okay, the task at hand we have right now is trying to come up with a number, I think, if you want to drop it into the proposed budget. We don't have to decide whether or not it's good, bad, or indifferent to actually do this. So I'm going to try to throw out a number here in a second, but refresh, or tell me if I'm wrong, the current support from the city for the employees is 100% for the individual employee and 80% of the family? Or what is it?
So for medical coverage for the employee AWC plan, 100% for the employee, and it's 90% plus the 2%. So for the family, so it's basically 92%.
Okay.
So
now, having asked that, I'm not sure that's relevant for a part-time council member, that it would be the same. So I'm just trying to come up with a number, and the numbers you gave us before, I think, added up to, if it was 100%, it would be about $100,000. I don't think that's quite, like I say, I don't think it's quite relevant or analogous for a part-time council member. So for a budget number here, I'm going to throw out $75,000 that we include, and then let the Finance Committee figure out specifics.
I'll go for that.
Okay.
So it's no longer a TBD on the budget. It's a $75,000 increased expenditure budget as a placeholder. Right. Okay.
Councilmember or Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Well, I'll certainly support the 75,000. The one thing that I would say is we should probably get an informal poll of current council and incoming council to know that we have 4 before the Finance Committee goes down that path. But for future, and to Councilmember Odell's point of attracting people to run for council, I think it's important.
Great. I'll make the final comment. I appreciate Councilmember Hornish's suggestion right now. I like that $75,000 budget item number. I think that's a good workable number. I also agree with this that the council members, while it's a part-time position, it is very demanding on the family and the individual with the time that they put in. So I think offering the medical benefits would be very favorable. And one last comment is I am not qualifying yet for government medical benefits. I just want that to be very clear. Close, but not there yet. Okay, so we're now going to vote on what I understand is offering medical benefits, but we're deferring it to the financial committee with a $75,000 line item on the budget to work with that number. So all those in favor of that, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. By a vote of 7-0, the item passes. Okay, so next we have Addisqua Pine Lake Road Transportation Capital Budget. Per our council meeting, I'm wondering if, since this is council, would staff like to make a comment here?
So my comment here was to capture the next three items. These were all direction, thumbs up that was given at that 11/21 meeting. For the second and the third item, we have 330,000. There was some discussion of maybe that's not enough.
Yeah.
So if you could clarify if the 330 is the right number or if there's a different number, we need to put that in. And then for the SR 202, there was a range expressed, the 100 to 200. So we would need to have a certain number to add to the budget at that point.
Okay, first up is Councilmember Odell.
Thank you. Aaron, the Issaquah Pine Lake Transportation item, that is design only, I believe, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
I'm looking
Okay.
at Steve there.
Point number 2, the intersection improvement transportation capital project, that $330K is, I think, way low. But Steve is going to come up and illuminate it.
Here for a bit. Thanks again, councils, staff, Steve Moniszewski, Public Works. I think the number that council was talking about the other night was 500,000.
I think it was.
I think is what you were
What?
at. 500.
500.
I think that was the number, but didn't get to go back to the video yet to confirm.
Steve, what's it cost us to put in one fully signalized intersection? What's a good working number?
A full signal, a temporary signal like a span wire is in the low 100,000s. A full signal is much greater, topography dependent.
300?
A number of 500 to 700K.
I would
sticks in
say
my mind.
minimum $500,000 was my number.
So if we were to do one of those, it takes 2 times what we've got here.
Yes, and I think what we were talking about was small improvements we can make to existing intersections, i.e. extending turn pockets. A new controller was one of the items Stephen mentioned for this intersection because it doesn't have any more capacity for any phases to add, so it's maxed out. So those types of small improvements is what the intent was. And I think, I can't remember the top 2. I think this intersection was one, and then was it just down at 24th was the next one?
Northeast 8th.
8th?
Northeast 8th and Southeast
you.
8th, 228.
So yeah, those 2 estimates alone consumed the 330 number.
Right.
And I think council talked about doing a little more up to their discretion, but that was the discussion from Tuesday night.
Well, at this point, I would like to suggest we think about taking the number from 330 to 1 million. We don't have to spend it all, but
I'm sorry, you're suggesting that we look at
$1 million.
increasing it to 1 million,
the
the 330 number. As far as the SR 202 regional coordination, my recollection was that was going to be 200K at least.
I think the placeholder of the 100 to 200, it sounded like 200 was more palatable to the group, but it's up for you folks to choose.
Okay, thank you, Steve.
Okay, Councilmember Hornish, and then Councilmember Gerund.
Yeah, just a point of order. I think we're going to discuss all three of these, but then vote on them separately, it sounds like. Is that? Yeah, okay. On the 1.7, looking back through our notes from the, whatever our last meeting was, only $1 million of that would hit the 18 budget, correct?
That was the discussion, I recall, correct?
Okay, so instead of having a 1.7 million adjustment to the biennium, it would be a 1 million increase, not 1.7?
Yeah.
I think it can be, just recognizing we will get into contract for the number, whatever the number is when we actually get a real number.
Right.
Yes.
But as far as the budget that we will spend in 18, it's only $1 million, not 1.7. I think that's important to kind of note. I'm supportive of increasing the 330. I'm a little bit hesitant going up to $1 million. Just looking at everything that was proposed, I think I added up real quick in my head. It's just over $500,000, 500, 510, 520, something like that, without the Sahalli Way 202 northbound left turn pocket extension, which was a relatively. Do we have a number, ballpark number for that one at all?
We don't. I mean, it looks fairly simple, but you're in the lowlands, so any widening, you get mitigated, requirements for environmental impacts. We do have to strike up an interlocal with King County. There is time and effort, but I don't want to sell the project short and say, oh yeah, it looks like it's a $20,000 job, a little patching here and some striping there, we're done. I mean, if we widen and we impact wetlands, they are present. I mean, I don't want to overpromise.
Well, and I think we talked before that there seemed to be a consensus that maybe that should be the highest priority one, although I know timing, you may not be able to do it because of the coordination and everything. But as far as what we want to allocate in the 18 mid-biennial update for the second item, not the third is something different. But for the second item, I'm going to throw out 750,000. I'm a little bit, like I said, I'm hesitant for the $1 million. That seems a little excessive to me, but I think significantly over the 330. And I'm open to discussion.
Okay.
Well, I just to kind of put a final point on it, and I'd take the midpoint of the 100 to 200 to make it simple for point 3.
Councilmember Gerand, and then Deputy Mayor Malchow.
Thank you. I support what Tom Hornish has said. The 1.7 million I suggest for 2018, we put that at 1 million. And 750,000, including the Sahalli Way extension up the hill, if it happens, I'm supportive of that. I still would like to see the SR 202 at the 200,000 level in terms of being, at least putting it out there as supporting a regional solution. It may not get spent in 2018 anyway.
It's a drop in the bucket, too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Deputy Mayor Malchow, and then Councilmember Hornish and Valderrama.
Yeah, so I'm supportive of looking at all three of these. I think I can survive with the suggestion of 750 because we don't have to spend it, and anything we do spend is going to come back to the next council anyway. And the same would go for the SR 202 coordination. Councilmember Hornish, was your suggestion 150? Is that what you said?
Yes, I'm not hard over on that. I was open to discussion.
Yeah, I think, again, I go back to the same thing. We can put 200 in there, and then the following council is going to have the right to say what we actually end up spending there. So.
Okay, Councilmember Huckabee.
Yes. I'm very supportive of changing the Issaquah Pine Lake Road Transportation Capital Project to $1 million. The intersection improvements, I don't have a good number at this point in time. And this afternoon, we're going to be talking about concurrency and looking at the LOS for intersections. I noted that the only intersection at this point that is a level E is the Issaquah Pine Lake intersection. And I'm wondering if we could defer this item and come up with a brief perhaps you can give us some suggested numbers this afternoon, and we could come back to that at the end of the transportation meeting in deciding what we would want to put in there for a biennial budget adjustment, or if you can give us some numbers at this point in time, if we went to the LOS for intersections and we wanted to accomplish that all in the next biennium, what would that, or in this, in 2018, what would that cost?
So I guess we have no numbers, but item 1, which is the design, which is further to the south and east, right?
Right.
So that is not inclusive of the intersection. I think you have time. I'm not sure that a number has to be thrown at Esquel Pine Lake Road and intersection improvements before the biennial budget, because as we get into 18 and go through that in beginning of, April we start budget work or sooner, I think there's time for that. It's a great point. And we don't have a LOS adjustment yet, so I can't even guess at what the improvements might
Okay.
be. I mean, we know there needs to be some, but it is fairly maximized intersection. It might be simple things, it might be reconfiguration. I don't know, but I think we do have time for that because I don't think we'd be able to get a design done and implemented in 18 anyway,
Okay.
in all honesty.
And I wasn't sure
Yeah.
whether, because we have talked about the intersection improvements. We want to improve driver experience as soon as we can, but I didn't know if that was possible in 2018 or if we should just put some money in here maybe for planning.
Yeah, I know we did speak to small things like working with the flagging staff at the school to run their crosses in conjunction with light timing and some of those little things to get some benefits and improve the intersection as much as possible without any improvements. It's just use. So those things we're looking at as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, next we have Councilmember Valderrama.
Well, I appreciate you bringing this forward. As I had mentioned on the last time, these were all supposed to be part of the Transportation Master Plan, and we had looked at them previously, put them in, and they were supposed to come to us prioritized. And then we expect these to be, as we did then, to be priorities, but we were going to look at it in a holistic fashion. Now we're going forward with them piecemeal. Not sure why. Again, I had asked previously, we can't wait the 34 days for the new council to do this. I appreciate we're going to be putting placeholders for them, but under that line of thinking for the first one, I agree with Councilmember Hornish of the 1 million to reduce that placeholder. Remember, these were supposed to be small adjustments, but people are throwing millions out here. The next one on the intersection, I would prefer to the 500,000. On the third one, the regional coordination, I also go with Councilmember Hornish's suggestion on that. And again, that'll depend on what comes out of both talking to our regional partners as well as what we can get with the next council and the legislative committee out of the Senate and the House, and hopefully support again of studies as we did with our legislative committee this year. Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of this discussion. I would like to ask council if I can take some liberties as we go through here on this item 1. It seemed like there was a lot of discussion of reducing this to 1 million.
Yeah.
And so before we put things to a vote, would it be, I'm actually asking, do I get a heads up on making the vote on 1 million as opposed to 1.7?
Yeah.
Okay, so as amended,
Yeah.
I think I have a question from Councilmember Odell here.
Yeah, I think the 1.7 is the total cost of the design. And we were talking about spending 1 million this coming year. The design will actually probably spread over 2 years. So my understanding is the 1.7 would be split into 2 parts, 1 million for 18 and 7/10 for 19. Is that everybody else's understanding? I'm getting nods, positive nods. Okay.
And if I may interject, that is a placeholder staff has derived, as far as we can tell by working our magic.
may be different.
So maybe a little higher, maybe a little lower, but that's our estimate.
So thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Odell. So then is the $1 million vote, do I still have a head nods up on that?
Yes.
Okay, this is for the year. All right, so all those in favor of approving the Pine Lake Road Transportation Capital Project as amended to $1 million, please raise your hand. Yes? All those opposed? So we have a vote of 7-0 passing at $1 million. The second item, the intersection improvements. This one, I heard a couple of different numbers. I heard $500,000. I heard $750,000. It seemed like there was more for the $500,000. Is that a number that people are weighing in on?
I still like the 750.
750? 750, does that look like that's appropriate number?
Vote on that one first.
Okay, so let's go ahead and vote on the 750. So the intersection improvement transportation capital project at $750,000. All those in favor, raise your hand. Okay, we have a vote of 7-0 that it passes at $750,000. Item number 3, the SR 202 coordination project. This, I think we landed on $200,000 is the number. Is that correct? Okay. All those in favor of passing this item at $200,000, please raise your hand. Yes. Okay. All those opposed? No. So we have a vote of 7-0 that passes at $200,000. Okay, so that concludes that segment on the council. Just for a time check, it's 5 minutes to 11 right now.
Potty break.
Would you like to take a break right now? Would that be more important than finishing this?
Yeah, because I
Okay.
suspect this next one's
Let's go ahead and reconvene at 11 o'clock. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Did I hear correctly?
Good thing we didn't do this the other night.
Thank you. Let's see, 2:30.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Isabel's record would have been in jeopardy.
Yes, we would have buzzed the chatter.
That's what I know, but what I heard was a reference to some.
Specifically, that we're talking about the LOS intersection this afternoon, and what would he suggest as a dollar amount if we didn't know? Just doing the intersection at Isco Pinewood Road.
It was a good game. I thought it was a wash.
So housing balance didn't pass. I was just going to update, right? So the first two are good.
Oh, are they going to ask the direction on your general fund contingency or street fund, ending fund balance? Yeah. Or you're just going to take it all out of?
This is their need. Well, I'm trying to do a wrap-up slide right now. 75.
So we get out faster to get sent to this.
Oh.
Bring my toolbox and take those chairs apart, so we have to
specifically told staff that these are not to be.
Couldn't last less than 3 minutes. That's what John Crowley suggested.
That's a good idea.
well, I tried it late last Tuesday and
So we're at 50,000.
Or tea. Caffeinated coffee and tea.
Okay, that's what we got. Okay. So next one is going to go to that slide. Well, that's revenue options. So we're going to go to options to study, and that's just kind of the background is the same.
I know, but I don't think we're going to get done in an hour because you've got two.
Well, the mayor can certainly.
Well, so two left on the budget.
Well, they're kind of the same thing as raising the taxes too, right? It's kind of, to me, it's one issue.
Yeah.
Should
Oh, it
be
is,
increase the
but
levy.
knowing our council will nitpick all three.
That's probably true.
Yeah, it'd be an
You're
option
probably
they can
right.
look at.
I
See,
remain optimistic.
I don't know how AWC, they may require if you are here to enroll in Medicare. Yeah, as in, yeah, right, you can get a supplemental plan. So I don't know if AWC has a supplemental plan.
North Korea's at it
for
again.
Medicare.
Yep, they launched another ballistic missile.
To where?
Oh,
I don't know.
Over where it should be.
Okay.
It's a-
I don't know.
yeah.
Yeah, it's just, it's less expensive for me to have the city's primary, so I don't have to buy the.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, get that. So I wondered about that. They still offer retirement coverage? Oh. Okay. So I don't know that I'm going to that. Let's see what.
Oh, I can't find it. huh?
They're all in cyberspace. Look at them. They're all somewhere else.
We're trying to look at other missiles.
950.
That's a good picture.
275, is that what you have as a total?
So we are.
Yeah, we're just a couple minutes late. Who are we looking for? Councilmember Odell and Huckabee.
I'm saying trajectory unknown. That's pretty weird, as even they're saying.
North Korean
Fire off another missile, but they're saying trajectory unknown, and we've got all these satellites we're watching this. I'm surprised that they're not saying it yet. I hope it's not towards Guam, or else we'll know. Yeah, apparently the North Koreans fired a missile again, but They're still
that,
saying the trajectory is
Snacks in here.
unknown. And so-
Any
Councilmember
chance we
Hornish
can
is
get
ready to
snacks
go.
in
He's
here?
already lit up here.
It's an hour.
Are
Can you hear my
complaining
stomach
about
rumbling
late?
over the microphone?
I should.
That's okay. It's okay.
Okay, welcome
I'm gonna eat
back.
that
See
Snickers.
Witten's chair. She had that special chair that she used to bring in with the big back.
Okay, so if we could have the overhead up again, so maybe we can kind of get our placeholder here.
Okay. Oh.
She's got your back.
Wow, look at this. The summary is already there.
So I've updated the summary for our decisions
impressive.
made. I've made use of my break there.
Okay, so from here, we are going to consider revenue options regarding utility tax, property tax, and the TBD. Councilmember Jaron, would you like to kick this off?
Thank you, Aaron.
Sure.
There's the kickoff right there.
Okay.
What we talked about is that if we're going to increase the budget significantly for be it transportation projects, we should be looking at tax increases. And we have banked, as it says there, we banked the property tax 1% for 8 years now, I believe it is. And 1% increase in the regular levy for 2018 would be $270,000. I had asked to compare that to other options. In the utility tax, we see 1% is 1.1 million annually for, and councilmanic authorities up to 6%. Most cities actually are close to the 6%, I believe. Isn't that correct? Whereas we have no utility tax. So that option, just 1% utility tax, would be 1.1 million annually. And the transportation benefit district that Kathy brought up, $20 per car would result in roughly $640,000 per year. So I would hope that we would have this in the context of a discussion when we're talking about increasing the budget, whether we should be realistically thinking about at least keeping up with inflation by doing some increases in taxes.
Okay, I have some comments, but I put Councilmember Jaron on the spot and asked him to comment since his name was there. But did staff want to make a comment before we go into open discussion on this?
Now you're going to let them hang
No,
along?
this is just this slide is the same as the financial retreat. We just updated for the 1%. That's why that's in blue there. Gives it a little bit of information.
Okay, so from there, Councilmember Hornish?
Yeah, I'm kind of coming back to what we just discussed and the overall impact. I just added it up. From the 2018, the biennium adjustment is going to be an overall $3.6 million increase expenditure, of which at least 0.4 that I asked my earlier question is capital. Of the new 2.2 that we just approved here at council, how much of that is capital versus operational? Any idea? It's all pretty much operational, I think, right?
Well, the capital increases that you approved, the 1 million for the design is so that was the large piece there.
That's capital, okay.
So we could go back to, so intersections would be capital expense, SR 202 project funding, that's capital.
So basically, all of what we just did is all capital. It's not an impact to the operational.
The first
Correct.
three would be operational.
The only item is the 200,000 for the communications funding, which would be operations.
And medical plans, yeah.
Oh, that's right, because that wasn't in the original
Oh,
Exhibit 3.
and then the medical.
Yeah,
yes.
that's I missed that. That's right. Okay.
That's capital. Structure.
No,
Well,
the sculpture is capital.
That's capital.
Sculpture's capital.
Yeah.
75.
Okay, so what we just added to the 1 million operating adjustments in Exhibit 3 that we saw before is another 250,000. 200 from communications and 50 for the art. Okay. Okay, so that gives me what I needed. Now, another question that we had, or another issue that we didn't really get to discuss about, and I had raised it earlier when we were back in our earlier meeting. We have the Sahalli Way, what do we call it, Sahalli Way Improvement Project funded in 18, and that would be all capital, right? Mm-hmm. But we're not, and I think we said put a hold on the design of that, so we're sure as heck not going to be spending the capital improvements. So we haven't backed that out of the capital budget of the 18 yet. Not sure I really care. I'm more focused on the operational, and it goes into whether or not we should, do we need more revenue or not? So with the increases that we have to the 1.25 total all-in bottom line adjustment to the 18 previously adopted biennium budget, I still come back to the question, how close are we on an operational basis to how much revenue do we have? And with this increase of 1.25 in the expenditure, how much differential do we have? How much cushion do we have? Do you have any feel for it?
So you're kind of jumping to the end here, but
Sorry.
So you're
I have a
looking at
tendency to do
ending
that.
fund balances, which is the total. So when we look at from a budgetary perspective, the operating pieces are the ones that are shaded, and again, this is the ones that lead to the forecast. So these are the same fund balance slide that we had at the first reading of the budget when those numbers were included in this. So the total of all funds is the 26 million. And then your operating funds, so you had the general fund at 12 million, street at 6.9. So these are all your fund balances for both the operating pieces and the capital pieces. So what we've done here today is the blue circle, that 2.275 million was a mix primarily of capital, but there was some operating in there as well, the 200,000 and the
50 for the art.
75 for the
50 for the art.
council, yeah. So general fund is unrestricted funding. So my recommendation is to fund those projects that you've now approved the expenses for, is to increase the transfer from the general fund balance, that 12 million, to fund that 2.275 expenditure. So that's how I would fund it. That would be my proposal, is to increase the transfer to fund it. The reason I'm recommending that is that there's a mixture in the capital fund balance. When you look at that 1.2 million ending fund balance for the transportation capital fund, there's impact fee monies that are in specific projects within the capital fund that are restricted for use on capital projects. There's also REIT money, there's also grant money, you have these restrictions within those fund balances. And so my suggestion is use the unrestricted fund balance, which is in the general fund, and use that to pay for those expenditure increases that you've discussed about authorizing.
Okay, maybe my question is more basic than that. I'm sorry. How much revenue with what's being proposed with no increase in the property tax are we looking at versus how much expenditure are we looking at on an operational basis, given that we just increased it by the 1.275 from the original 18 budget that was approved? I'm looking strictly income, expenditure.
Aaron,
It's a cash basis.
slide 8.
Yeah. You may not have that, is where I understand, but.
There.
Did I get it?
Yeah, there it is.
That's what I wanted. Okay.
So here's a simple. So we're just
13,
looking
sorry.
at general fund here for 2018. So these are your
Well, not operational,
2018 budget, operating revenue, 42 million. The operating expense, and this just the general fund, is 36 million. So you have a difference in that of 6.1 million. Now that excludes your transfers and your contingencies. So that's your 2018 picture. And that was before the adjustments as well.
That's before the adjustments.
The adjustments made today.
The 6 would go down by another quarter of 300,000, basically. So instead of 6.1, it might be 5.8, rough numbers. From what we just approved, increased spending. But it still doesn't tell me where we're at on a bottom line basis of overall revenue and overall expenditure. So I can't tell whether or not we should increase revenue or not. It is my difficulty, because I want to see it on an operational basis, and I have yet to see that.
Aaron, one of the misleading things is that it shows 6.1 million excluding general fund transfers, but you need 3.5 million general fund transfer to the street fund simply to cover the paving, the annual paving replacement.
Right.
So the question is how much transfer is going to capital from the general fund?
Well, Donna, wouldn't the paving be in the 42 million?
Page 2.
No.
36.
Yeah. No, it's not.
Needs to transfer.
The paving comes from a transfer from general fund to the street fund.
If you look at Exhibit 4, page 2, it lists all the transfers. Couple different looks.
Right up at the top, it shows 5.05 million transferred from the general fund to the street fund, and 3.5 million of that is overlay, correct?
3.5 million or what?
3.5 million of the 5.9 million going to the street fund is for overlay, which is operational, not capital. So I'm with Tom. The picture isn't that rosy in terms of how much cushion you have.
But I still don't know what it is.
Right.
Well, the other thing that's not, shown here is the looming expense from some of the road projects we have already kicked off, like Issaquah Falls City. Even though that's a capital, that and some other things are going to chew up the transportation balance.
But we have the cash, and we don't need to raise more. The cash has already been kind of set aside or reserved for those projects.
If I may raise another point, if you look at the 2017 actual revenues compared to the budget for 2017, you'll find that our projections are we're going to come in over the actual revenues by about 1.6 million, I believe, 800,000 going to capital and 800,000 to operating.
Right.
Isn't that about right?
And we, as part of the normal process, we always true up for actuals before reprojecting. So when we're looking at the operating forecast, that's why we close. So our timing now would be to close out 17. We're 1 month away from that. To be able to close out 17 and update it for actual revenues received versus budgeted, and then expenditures as well, which would be, contingency savings. So planned for and budgeted contingencies that were unspent in 17.
Does that conclude your questions? I'll move to Councilmember Huckabee, then Odell and Valderrama.
Yes, thank you. If I look at Exhibit 4, page 2, down on the bottom half of the page, it shows 8.7 million being transferred from the general fund to a variety of different funds. That means, does that mean that I take that 6.1 and so we're in the negative at that point? Again, back to Tom Hornish's point, what are the actual dollars? And if we take that 8.7 away, what other revenue is coming in to offset some of that? The other
Right, so-
comment, okay, and then just another quick comment. In terms of the Transportation Benefit District, I'd like to speak just for a moment about that, because that is something that's being used very broadly throughout the state in a variety of different cities. You can also increase that amount on a citizen's vote. And I was looking to see if I had the copy of my document, and I don't see it when I was looking through the files. And because there is a whole series of steps you can take to increase that to $40 or $50 based on citizens' votes. And it's a restricted amount of time, and it's a restricted amount of projects. I think because other cities are using that and you're giving the opportunity for your citizens to provide some input as to whether they really want those projects done more quickly, I think that is a little bit different than some of the other increases, tax increases or revenue increases that we're looking at, where you could actually survey the citizens and see if they are actually willing to pay up for some of those intersection expenses that we've been talking about.
Okay, Councilmember Odell and then Valderrama.
Aaron, can we go back to the first slide you showed? No, before that. That one, yeah. The utility tax is around $66 a household. The TBD, Transportation Benefit District, assuming you own 2 cars, would be $40 a year. What's the 1% equate to for the average house in our city? I like to think in those terms.
The 1% is about, so if you take a $600,000 average home, you're about $24, I would say.
There are not too many $600,000 average homes in Sammamish.
Okay, so 1.2 million would be $48.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly.
You want 1.2?
I get that. Okay. Okay, 48 versus 66 versus 40. If you go to Exhibit 4, page 2, looking at revenues and some of the downside issues with the revenues, right now our revenues are very strong. Building plan check fees, permits, et cetera, are all doing really well year over year. However, we have this thing out there called a moratorium, which we all hope is relatively temporary. But it could take some time. And the question I have for us to think about is, what is the downside on building permits, all those check fees, those revenues? Are we running a risk here that we're not taking into account?
It seems to me that those revenues are to cover the actual costs of issuing those permits. So there should be some connection between, if permits go down, the revenues are going to go down, but so are the costs going to go down, because we're not allowed to make a profit in that area. So that is essentially somewhat of a pass-through item. So I don't really consider that as revenue per se that can be spent on other items.
In the long term, it may be. In the short term, we may still have payroll going on. But,
Yeah, it may take a while for the adjustment to occur.
again, going back to previous discussion, that's something for the city manager to actually manage. I think there are contingency reserves, Lyman, that allow us to not knee-jerk react to these things.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. We have budgeted a reserve in case there's a downturn in the economy, to give us a buffer and not lay off all staff, for example, but be able to put them to work on other areas. But that we have built that in, and we've done that historically.
Okay.
The other thing related to revenue coming in from permitting, there will be a lag, because we do have things in the pipeline that staff would continue to work on. So if there's a downturn, I would expect it to be a very soft landing, and it would ease out probably over the next 2 to 3 years.
Okay. Well, these are important issues in terms of risk consideration here.
Definitely.
So thank you for that clarification. That's all I have at the moment.
Great, Councilmember Valderrama.
I concur with some of the comments that have been made by, the comments made by Councilmember Hornish and Gerand as to looking at the revenue. Also concerned about looking at staffing levels, as Odell had just mentioned. More importantly, while we're going to need more revenue, particularly on the capital budget, that's very clear, I'm concerned that before we look at taxes, as I mentioned before, we need to put our own house in order, and that's something that this council has decided not to do, even though in January, at our January retreat, that was the priority. I then find it insensitive and bad timing to then come back and ask our citizens to pay more taxes when we haven't done our fiduciary responsibility this year in taking care of what should be done, particularly given that Seattle Times article I shared with all of you showing that we pay the highest property taxes already in King County. And on top of that, we now have the increase of McCleary and Sound Transit 3, which I believe for the average $750,000 home was about $2,800 to $3,000. And then if you start looking at tabs, well, ST3 hit us on that, and we had a huge uproar about that, where there's $700. So I think before we go into this, as I mentioned in June, the tone was going to change dramatically if we did not get our house in order with McCleary and Sound Transit 3 hitting. We need to look and address those issues first and then make that good faith effort presenting to the citizens that we're trying to be responsible rather than first say, we'll tax you more and then figure out, even as these questions are coming up, that should have been addressed, and leaving this to the onus of the next council that's going to have to plow through this. Thank you.
Great. There are no more questions on this item. Just some comments that I would want to make. I really do appreciate Councilmember Hornish's questions pursuing the operational expenses versus the revenue. Operational budget is important. I'm looking at the staff. For me, my question to you would be, there were just a couple of items brought up that that $6.1 million was a little bit thinner than what it looked like. Are you comfortable with the operational cash flow on the city? Does that look solid for you based on your numbers?
With no increase in revenue, as from what's proposed. Yeah, that's the bottom line question.
Yes.
Okay.
And that's the ending fund balance picture I was showing.
Okay.
So from a cash perspective, that's where your fund balances are.
If, however, you wanted to essentially hedge your risk, as it were, the 1% increase would be, in my mind, potential item for the council to consider. We've not taken the 1% for 8 years now. I would consider a 1% increase essentially as essentially a down payment. We increased it, the operating budget, by about $275,000. The 1% increase in the regular levy would be about $270,000, so that would almost be a one-to-one match on that for your consideration. We, as Aaron mentioned, we're comfortable with where we are and with our ending fund balances. However, this $270,000 would basically allow us to maintain the status quo on operations coming into this meeting. So it's a prerogative of the council, but that would be my comment.
Thank you. I did want to comment on these items. The first things that we really need to address is the operational expenses. I mean, that's how we get from year to year. And it sounds to me like we're in good shape on our operational numbers as it stands right now. We know we have a capital investment that is significant. And these other items, in particular the Transportation Benefit District and the utility tax, those could actually be, I know another discussion point that we have on here is bonding. These are areas that could be used to really make an investment that would have an impact on our capital deficit and really look forward, that we could really look forward to. And my leaning on this is to leave this to the next council to really look at that. I would hope in some respects that as a voter, I get to vote for an option on an advisory vote on one of these with a big chunk of fixing the roads in Sammamish. And so I'm very encouraged, especially this, the transportation benefit, if it's directly geared towards capital investment in transportation, in the city, if it's those kinds of things are looked at. But again, I would defer this to the next council to let them really vet this, bring it out publicly, and talk about these items. So that's where I would lean. Councilmember Gerund, and then Valderrama.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm glad that staff again passed out this handout from the June 2017 financial retreat. So it goes to what the mayor was saying. If you want to know how much you can get by bonding a certain amount of revenue, there's some indications there. And I would suggest that the next council listen to the citizens, and if they want the transportation facilities built faster, bonding is the way to go. But of course, in bonding, you have to pay the principal and interest. And if you look at the utility tax as another stool in our another leg in our tax stool, which isn't being attacked quite now. Right now, McCleary and Sound Transit is hitting our property tax and hitting our vehicle license fees. Utility tax is independent of that, and I think that would be, perhaps the nexus isn't there as much as the Transportation Benefit District is, but nevertheless, the nexus is there in the sense that it's coming out of our pocket. It's a user fee. I think that utility tax is one that you can also somewhat control. You can huddle in your house at 62 degrees rather than at 80 degrees and save a little bit on utility tax. So
We're all going to do that just to save on the utility
Yeah.
tax.
So I would encourage the council next year, perhaps at the retreat, to talk about transportation facilities that are needed and whether or not we should do some bonding. At this time, I don't encourage us to go ahead with the utility tax at this year's adjustment.
Okay, next we have Deputy Mayor Malchow, then Councilmember Huckabee and Odell.
Yeah, I think I'm going to echo some comments that have already been made. As I look over these items, I'm hearing the city saying we're comfortable with where we're at, but I'm cognizant of the fact that we're spending more on our operations, and that 1% potentially could make up for that. But I am very cognizant of tax fatigue in our voters right now. One thing that I think we keep talking about McCleary, but we're not putting numbers to that. And for our households next year in 2018, we're looking at the local school levy rates still being in place for the Issaquah School District. That's $4.06 per $1,000 of average valuation. For the Lake Washington School District, that's $3.16. Those are not going to go down in 2018 while the state then steps in with its levy rate. It's not until 2019 that the school districts will go down to that maximum rate of $1.50, and that will be in front of voters to decide what they want to do in February of 2018. So I'm cognizant that not just our citizens here, residents, but everywhere are going to get hit twice next year, and so I'm reluctant to do anything that would further the taxes that they're going to have to burden next year. I do like the idea of an advisory vote. I think I would like to hear from our residents is exactly how they want to go about doing this. I think we hear people asking for road projects. We are undertaking a massive effort in order to provide that for them, and I think it should be up to them to tell us how they want to pay for it.
Next we have Councilmember Huckabee and then Odell.
Thank you. And yes, I very much agree with you that we should have our citizens talking about this and determining what method. But I think we have to be very clear on the approaches and all the details and the consequences of each approach. And I wanted to ask Aaron, I'm looking at this issue around bonds. My recollection is that we have a fairly high cost if we issue bonds in terms of bonding and other costs. It's not just the interest rate and the principal, it's the cost of money that is going for the bonding component alone. And I think we need to really understand how that affects what we actually have available to do street improvements or whatever other improvements we need. I also want to reiterate two other things I want to reiterate. One is that we don't know what Washington, the other Washington, is going to do in terms of muni bonds, whether they will all be tax deductible or whether they will not be tax deductible, or whether it's only the private activity bonds that will be non-deductible. So until we actually have that information, which is the other reason I favor kicking the can down the road to 2018, because there's a lot of information and potential consequences that we don't understand at this moment in terms of making a decision. The other thing I would hope that we would always, rather than, and Councilmember Valderrama, I'll look to you because you always talk about the taxes that our citizens are paying. I'd like to continue to make that distinction between what they're paying as a city tax versus what they're paying as a self-imposed school district tax. We are not to blame for the increased taxes that citizens are paying. They're largely voting most of it in. And so I think we're getting a little bit of anger from citizens that's misdirected because they don't understand the distinction between what we're doing, which is largely not raising taxes, versus the school districts, which are always asking for the tax increases, and we vote those.
Okay, we have Councilmember Odell and then Valderrama, and we need to come to a conclusion soon here.
I want to thank Councilmember Huckabee for her comments about other taxes from other taxing agencies. I cringe in fear at the next great idea that comes out of King County for us. And she's absolutely correct that when you look at your tax statement, more goes to the schools than goes to the city by a considerable margin. And that is not going to improve. This city needs to look out for itself. We should, of course, look over our shoulder at the environment we're in. But because King County has raised taxes, school districts have raised taxes, the state may be raising taxes, does not mean the city should not look at keeping itself whole as well. Therefore, I am going to be in favor of the 1%. I voted for the last 7 years against taking the 1%, but frankly, in view of some of the things Kathy just mentioned about uncertainty in D.C. on muni tax deficiency or deductibility, I'm a little concerned. There were two big issues at National League of Cities. One was unmanned aerial vehicles, codenamed drones, and the impact that would have on cities. The second thing was what the heck is going on in D.C. with the tax situation. If there was anything else being discussed, I didn't hear much about it. But Kathy is absolutely right. The situation with respect to the federal tax structure and the municipal bond issue is going to have and also the deductibility of low-cost housing bonds, et cetera,
Local taxes.
state and local taxes, is going to have a very unsettling effect on all cities in this country. I do have a question for staff, and that is, as cruising through this document, I noted cable franchise fees have not been increased as far as I could determine in recent memory. Is that an area of opportunity?
It is something that we can discuss with the cable companies. We are limited in how much they're receiving. The cable companies are losing actually subscribers. Also, we do not get franchise fees on internet side of the house. So, for example, satellites don't pay a franchise fee as such. So that is subject to conversation with them. We have an old and expired franchise agreement with the cable company, with Comcast. and we're working toward renewing that, but they're essentially in no hurry.
Yeah, well, Comcast approached me about 4 years ago they said, we're ready to sit down and discuss the contract. And I said, well, yeah, maybe. Their view of a contract is probably not our view of a contract. So that's something else. But that's one rock I think the next council might want to turn over to see if there is some potential for getting some additional funding there. With respect to the utility tax and the transportation benefit tax, I'm not ready to cross the bridge on that at this point, especially seeing as we don't have the TMP done. This is going to be a major driver for what happens here, as is the tax situation in DC I just talked about. Bonding may not be the best option for us in the future. We may have to do more self-funding than we thought we would, in which case we're going to have to do some interesting things. I do want to thank staff for the handout from the financial retreat. This does bring back a lot of information that had since slipped into the background. So thank you.
Okay, we are going to close up now with Councilmember Valderrama and Councilmember Huckabee, and then we've been around the horn several times now. We should probably call for a vote here.
Let the record, this is my show, that this is my second round, so while some are a little ahead of me, I'll lap them later as we go by. I think a lot of good points have been brought up, particularly as I had mentioned, the high amount of property tax that's now coming down alone on ST3 and McCleary of the average house of $750 being $2,800 to $3,000. Good luck finding that home of $750,000. We do have currently, as I had sent you all the article from Seattle Times, the highest property tax in King County cited, and everybody pays the levy rates. Everybody is paying school district fees. And as far as Lake Washington school districts, we're paying higher property tax than Redmond or Kirkland, and likewise for the Issaquah school district when you look at the property for our peers, which brings up an interesting question, because if we're paying the highest property tax and we're paying getting paid the highest impact fees, but we're told that we have the lowest costs of service compared to everybody, there seems to be an imbalance that needs to be looked at. And so this starts to begin to look like Humpty Dumpty economics, where despite the fact that I've used all my king's horses and all my king's men, I need more horses and men. So I think we need to do a real dive. We have failed to do that this year. It's going to the next council now. I'd be for an advisory vote, but I think it's insensitive since we didn't put ourselves and take upon ourselves our fiduciary responsibility to look at that and those levels of services that are now being raised and questioned, that I'll be opposed to this. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Huckabee.
Yes, I've asked several times whether we can simply take our road impact fees and increase them for the inflation factor. It would increase some revenue. It would increase some revenue on new growth coming in. It would not increase the cost to any of our citizens. The dollar amount, I have no idea how large or small, but it just seems to make a great deal of sense if we could just simply do that. And I'd like to understand what the process is, and can we just move that forward independently of all these other options that we're studying.
Okay, that concludes this discussion. So if we could go back to the list that we have. Okay, so we did talk about both of these issues. I believe, can I assume, council members, that we've covered both the taxes and the bonding?
No.
I think we should.
I'm going to vote on them separately, but at this point, I think we've covered both of those. So can I call for the vote on consider revenue options for the utility tax, property tax, and transportation benefit district? All those in favor say...
Wait. What are we voting on? Yeah, to increase it, not increase it, or what?
Well, it's just, I'm sorry. Do we want to, it's saying consider them. So is there any one of these? I guess, should I go through, I'm going back through clarification. Should we take utility tax, property tax, and each one separately?
I would do that.
Okay, all right.
So the option would be either to vote yes, that we would consider it now, versus allowing the new council to consider all of them.
Correct.
We're dealing with the first one.
So
on the
let's
next.
go to the first one with that question, though. Is this something that we should increase this year?
Mayor
really? Is
Keller,
it
can I
property
make
tax?
a point?
Yes.
The number one is our next agenda item,
Correct.
actually.
Good
So
point.
can we skip that?
Yes.
Thanks.
Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. Okay, so the utility tax. All those in favor of further approval of a utility tax, raise your hand. All those opposed, raise your hand. It looks like a vote of 7-0, it fails. Okay, and so next would be the TBD. All those in favor of a TBD, please raise your hand. All those opposed, please raise your hand. By a vote of 6-1, it fails. Okay, so that should end that section. And now we're going to go to really item one, the property tax increase, which is the next item.
Actually, you still need to vote on the budget.
Oh, on the whole budget?
Yeah.
Number one?
Without number one, then?
Without,
We have to do
were
number
holding
one and
that.
come back for the
yeah,
budget?
Yeah,
Yeah.
we could do that.
Yes, we were holding that. Okay, so for item number two, that's where we are right now. This is for increasing the property tax. Mr. City Manager, would you like to comment here?
Hey, well, do we have a presentation or no?
Further presentation. So we
Okay.
gave this at the public hearing, and what is currently included is not the 1%. So that capacity is being banked. So the decision before you now is whether you want to change that current scenario and consider a different scenario.
And it sounds as though the discussion basically comes down to, based on conversation, perhaps increasing, taking the 1% for 2018, or continuing with just banking that capacity.
So on this particular item, because it is noticed, this I would need a motion to approve. So is there a motion to approve the increase in the property taxes?
I move we adopt the ordinance that does not increase the property tax, but banks the 1% as drafted.
do we need a,
And then if somebody wants to amend that, that would be the way to go.
Okay, but
Is it proper to amend it to adopt it? Or
No,
do you
you'd have
vote
to
it
vote
down?
it down.
Vote it down and then vote on adopting it?
your motion was to not adopt, correct?
Well, my
motion
motion
is
is
to
to
not
adopt
adopt.
the ordinance that as drafted does not increase the 1% property tax, but
do you want to
banks
bank it?
Yes.
Okay, so that would be the motion on the table.
Was there a
Second.
second?
I have a second. And let's repeat that so that we clear for the city clerk that we are voting on not increasing the 1% property tax, but banking the 1% property tax for future use. Everybody's clear on that? All those in favor of not increasing the property tax
Can we have discussion?
and banking it? Thank you. I'm sorry. Thank you, Councilmember Jared. Okay, so discussion. Go ahead.
we're waiting.
You're up.
Thank you. Actually, I would support what Councilmember Odell suggested, and that is taking the 1% this year. We haven't adjusted for inflation all these years, and we can't control what the state and Sound Transit do other than our individual votes. And by the way, as a city, we voted against Sound Transit 3. But we can control what we do with our own budget, and our citizens are wanting more services. We're not even keeping up with that if we don't consider inflation. And so I would be opposed to this motion.
Okay. Next, we have Deputy Mayor Malchow and then Councilmember Odell.
So I wanted to make a couple of points. One is that even though we don't take the 1%, our revenues still go up. And that is because the valuation of our property is increasing. I also want to make the point to those at home that are probably not watching, but maybe, is that the overall levy rate by us not taking the 1% does not stay consistent. It actually decreases. And while people don't understand that because their property taxes are increasing, we talked about all these other, taxing authorities like the school districts and the state. But the levy rate actually is decreasing that the city gets. I think we are. In 2017, it was $1.93 per thousand, and by not taking this 1%, it's actually decreasing to $1.72. Your taxes might be going up because your property value is going up, and so that's the difference. I think it's important to highlight that. But our revenues are increasing, even though we're not taking the 1%.
Okay, next we have Councilmember Odell, and then Valderrama, and then Jaron.
Christie's points about revenues increasing because of property valuations is accurate and well stated. However, we just went through a discussion about what was the delta between operating revenues and operating expenses, and it came out to very close to being the $270,000 number we're looking at here. If you are concerned about the crossover point inch bugging closer and closer, as some people have been as long as I've been politically active in the city, then maybe that should be forefront in your mind as we have this discussion. I have consistently voted against it, but for the last several months, maybe a year or so, I have been saying the time is coming to do this, and I think the time is here, particularly when I look ahead at the need for cash in the city for a number of things. We could not take the 1% and take it out of the ending fund balance, which is what Aaron suggested is one thing we could do. And yes, we can certainly do that. But at some point in time, we're probably going to have to borrow that amount and more to fund all these road projects that we need to do just to keep life semi-livable up here, irrespective of any new development. So that time is coming too. We do need to move on and step up to the fact that it is now time to start using some of our taxing capability. And I'm saying this as one of the people in the city who is on fixed income. None of my pensions, Boeing, Northwest, or anything else except for Social Security, are indexed. And by the time our fabulous friends in Washington get through with things, I suspect that may not be indexed anymore either. So it is time to bite the bullet and take the 1%. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Councilmember Odell. Next, we have Councilmember Valderrama, Jaron, and then Huckabee.
All good points, but given we didn't put our house in order, and we even have questions here of operational funding and the staffing that was raised again, given McCleary, as we said, that's come down ST3, and you had mentioned how difficult for people for fixed income to have another $3,000 hit, and then knowing that we didn't put our house in order, that we come back and put another hit on them, whatever minor you think this is, given that this is a cumulative being added on to it and that we have that highest there, I would be opposed to this. And I'm sorry that this is going to the next council, but they're going to have to deal with these issues.
Councilmember Jaron.
Thank you. I wanted to clarify something that Christie said, and that is, indeed, the city tax collections are going up, but individual taxes are not going up towards the city. As you said, the levy rate's going down. Even though your valuation goes up, you only pay the same amount to the city that you've paid for the last 8 years, on the average. If you live on a lake, I'm afraid you're paying more. But the property tax collections for the city are going up because of new construction. As the new construction comes in, those people now have a higher valuation than the vacant land, so they pay taxes at a higher total amount. So we are increasing our taxes as a city, but then we're increasing our citizens, so we have to provide more services. So with the new construction, we do get the impact fees, which go to the capital projects, and we get increased property taxes. Thank you.
Okay, next we have Councilmember Huckabee and then Hornish.
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Councilmember Jaron. I think that's really critical because our property taxes that we pay individually are not directly tied to the increase in the valuation. So overall, if you're looking at the city, because the valuation, it could double or even triple, but we're only allowed to collect a certain dollar amount. So by not taking the 1%, our property tax levy would be the same in 2018 as it was in 2017 on the homes that are currently within the city. The only increase is related to new construction. Now, individual property taxes may go up because the difference there is that $27,000 is spread differently. So if Bob's property values go up by $200,000, mine only goes up by $100,000, he will pay more and I will pay less. But I think it's really important for us to inform the citizens that unlike every other state in the United States, our taxing system is different in the state of Washington and is not tied to the increase in your property tax values.
Right.
Councilmember Hornish.
Thank you. For the city, I want to clarify one thing that Councilmember Odell said. It's not that we're eating up the 270 cushion that we had. It's that if we were to increase the 1%, we make up what we just increased today. That's eating into the cushion. My sense is we still have a cushion. I don't have a firm grasp as to what that number is. It's getting smaller, I agree with you. But it comes back to my stance that as I've stated before, and I hear you make all good points, but at some point we will have to, but until we have an overall plan, to Councilmember Valderrama's point, as far as putting our house in order and looking at it, can we save some money? What do we need to address the concurrency on a capital basis? Where are we going to get that money? We're not giving up the revenue by passing the motion or the ordinance that's in here. We are banking it, and we can still get to it when we come up with an overall plan that I hope we can get to in 2018.
Great, that concludes this discussion. My only comment would be I appreciate what Councilmember Hornish just said. I think rather than repeating it, I don't see that we're ready to really just take the increase yet until we've actually done some more analysis, and that will come out with the TMP. We're going to really see where we stand with our capital budget, and the operational budget can be dealt with at the same time if we're going to be looking for additional revenues. So that's my final comment. So from that, now let me be clear on, we are voting right now on the 1%. No, the motion is on the table.
The ordinance is written.
Is to not.
No, the ordinance on the table is to not increase 1%, but to bank the 1% for future.
And that's the ordinance.
As written.
Okay.
To adopt the ordinance, to adopt the proposed ordinance.
Proposed ordinance. Okay, so that is what we're going to be voting on right now. I don't know if there was a suggestion to amend. Councilmember Odell, Jaron, I didn't hear any amendment to that. So clearly we're voting on the ordinance as written. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no.
Nay.
We had a vote of 4-3.
Better do a show of hands.
Yeah, let's do a show of hands. We might as well. All those in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All those opposed? Okay, so we have a vote of 4-3. The motion passes. Okay, so now we go to the budget. We're going back to the approval of the budget.
As amended.
As amended. Okay, do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Let's specifically state the motion. I just want to make sure for the record. The motion would be to approve the adopted 2017-18 biannual budget ordinance as
Amended.
amended.
418.
418. Okay. All those in, any discussion?
Yes?
Well, first off, that's the motion. Did we have a second?
Second.
Yeah, we had a
So-
second.
Okay.
Christie
Okay.
seconded.
Okay. So the discussion.
Yes, what we haven't brought up is any other possible changes to the budget other than what you had on the list today.
Oh, that's true.
And I did have a comment to make. The Planning Commission has passed on the docket requests for next year. And in the packet that the Planning Commission addressed, staff had said that some of the docket requests are not in the budget for next year or staffing for next year. And that should not be an argument or a reason to vote against a docket request. And so I would encourage us to think in terms of either having a placeholder in the budget for possible work on docket requests that are passed, or at least assurance from staff that that should not be an argument to vote against the docket request, and that you have some contingency fund in order to cover it. So in a sense, I would rather see a placeholder in the budget to cover the contingency that next week, when the docket requests come to us, we have the ability to vote on a docket request independent of whether it's going to impact staff time or money. So would like some feedback from the city manager
Okay.
on that.
Okay, related to the docket requests, I would offer that as part of the docket discussion, we can talk about cost estimates for each item. Every docket does have an impact, whether it be time, resources, et cetera. So that can be part of the discussion. I believe we have sufficient reserves that we could make adjustments to that, or sufficient contingency, particularly within the general fund on our operating contingency, so that if council did decide that they wanted to move forward with a docket, that could be done on an informed basis. But if that would be sufficient, I'd be happy to try to provide those cost estimates as
Okay,
part
with
of
that
each.
input, I'm not going to ask for any changes on the budget.
Okay. I see Councilmember Odell.
Just a question for Lyman, and that is that if we did everything the plan commissions or that we don't have funds for that are being turned down, what would be the total cost?
I do not have that. Actually, community development is working on that, and we'll have that for you at the point of the docket. We're just not prepared to answer that.
Are we dealing with 5 digits, 6 digits, or 7?
Well, I don't believe so. I believe we're probably talking maybe in the probably, I would say, in the neighborhood of $100,000 to $200,000.
Okay, I'm happy with taking that out of reserves.
But that's just an off the top of my head estimate.
Okay, I see no more further discussion, so I'll call for the vote. All those in favor of passing the budget as amended, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The budget passes 7-0.
Yay.
I think that concludes
Right.
our unfinished business.
Oh,
I see no new business, no executive.
Actually, there was a call for an executive
Yeah.
session
Okay.
in the neighborhood of 10 to 15 minutes.
And the subject is on
Personnel.
personnel? Okay. Very good. So then we'll adjourn for 15 minutes.
Well,
Great.
actually, I don't believe that there'll be
no action.
There won't be any
there'll
action.
be no action. So I believe what we can do in the meantime is transform this room for our next meeting while we're in executive session. But the dais will still be here.
Oh, thank God.